Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly back into the 19th century, to a time when science was still part theater, part guesswork, and part wishful thinking. You're standing in a dim Victorian bedroom, the kind you might imagine from an old oil painting. Walls lined in heavy floral wallpaper, the faint tang of coal smoke lingering in the air. Your eyes trace the shadowed outline of a huge bed piled high with quilts, pillows, and something else entirely, an almost comical mountain of soft white feathers. You're about to try one of the most cherished, yet curiously impractical, Victorian insomnia cures, the featherbed and coal fire lullaby. Oh, and you probably won't survive this if you're allergic to dust mites. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull back the covers, and the featherbed almost swallows your hands. In Victorian Britain, the belief was simple. Deep warmth was the key to coaxing a stubborn mind into surrender. So the bed wasn't just for comfort, it was a full-blown sleep trap. Down pillows and eider-down quilts trapped heat like a cozy cocoon, while a coal fire in the grate sent a low, constant warmth into the air. If you've ever had that dreamy moment when you're half asleep under a heavy blanket on a cold night, you've tasted a fraction of what Victorians aim for. The coal fire itself was more than just functional. It was an art form. A well-laid fire was considered almost as important as the mattress. You'd hear the occasional crack of a settling coal, watch tiny flares of orange and blue as air rushed through the embers. The heat radiated in slow waves, brushing your cheeks with a gentle glow. The combination of warm air and warm bedding was supposed to lull your nervous system into a state of pre-modern bliss. But here's the twist. While you might imagine this was purely about comfort, Victorians also believed warmth could balance the body's internal humors. Too much cold? You risked upsetting the equilibrium of your blood and bile. Too much heat? Well, historians still argue whether prolonged exposure to a coal fire made one more prone to vapors, or, in modern terms, mild carbon monoxide poisoning. Let's just say ventilation wasn't exactly a strong point in most 19th century bedrooms. You shift on the mattress, and the feathers seem to mold themselves to your shape, like some primitive memory foam. Every movement releases a faint, musty smell, a scent that's part nostalgia, part warning sign. For the Victorians, the featherbed's softness was thought to cradle the body into perfect stillness, reducing the tossing and turning that kept people awake. They didn't have our modern understanding of deep sleep cycles, but they understood one thing. If you were comfortable enough not to move, you'd likely drift off. Of course, there was a fringe theory too, one that feels oddly modern. Some eccentric health writers of the era insisted that sleeping close to the floor or in a very hard bed was actually healthier because featherbeds trapped too much vitality in the limbs. But this was very much the minority view. The mainstream Victorian idea was that more warmth and softness meant more restorative rest. You imagine lying there as the clock ticks in the corner, each second softened by the padding of the room. Outside, a horse-drawn carriage clatters briefly past, and the sound is swallowed almost immediately by thick curtains and the muffled air. You pull the quilt up to your chin, and the heat builds slowly, a pleasant heaviness that seeps into your bones. In the corner, the fire sighs, and a thin plume of smoke twists lazily toward the chimney. The light flickers across the wallpaper, making the flowers appear to sway gently in a breeze that doesn't exist. Somewhere between one breath and the next, you find your eyelids sinking, the sensory input of the room narrowing down to just warmth and darkness. But because nothing in the Victorian era was entirely straightforward, there's a catch. Coal was expensive, and a roaring fire all night wasn't for everyone. Families on tighter budgets might let the fire die down before bed, relying solely on the featherbed's insulation. That meant a quick dash into bed before the room chilled. And once you were under the covers, you stayed put. No midnight trips to the kitchen unless you fancied returning to an icebox. Some households even added bed warming pans, a shallow metal dish filled with hot coals, swirled between the sheets before bedtime. The theory was that preheating the bed gave you a jump start on drowsiness. The reality? Sometimes it left a faint scorch mark on the linen, or, if handled carelessly, an ember that could start a fire. And that, in Victorian logic, was apparently just part of the charm. As you listen to the coal hiss and pop, you realize the combination of heavy warmth, gentle noise, and faint firelight could be hypnotic. Even now, there's something timeless about it. A ritual of shutting the world out, layer by layer, until nothing exists beyond the soft press of blankets and the fading glow at your bedside. Some Victorian doctors went so far as to prescribe the featherbed and fire as a cure not just for insomnia, but for melancholy. In their view, physical comfort was inseparable from emotional well-being. If you warm the body, you soothe the mind. And perhaps they weren't entirely wrong. You roll slightly, feeling the featherbed embrace you in a slow, silent exhale. The fire sighs once more. Outside, the city fades into a distant hum. You're not asleep yet, but you're close. Close enough that the difference between dreaming and waking feels like a single deep breath away. You're still warm from the featherbed, the memory of cold heat clinging to your skin like a sleepy echo. Now, in the hush of late-night London, or perhaps York or Bath, you're guided toward a small oak table near the bed. A porcelain cup waits there, steam curling up from its surface in ghostly ribbons. The smell is comforting, yet faintly strange. Warm milk, a hint of ale, a dusting of nutmeg, and the deep, slow sweetness of sugar melting into the mix. This is your midnight ritual, the Victorian milk posset. You cradle the cup, feeling the heat seep into your fingers. In a world without electric kettles or microwave mugs, preparing this drink was an art. First, the milk was heated until it just began to quiver. Never boil, lest you scorch the flavor. Then in went the ale or wine, which would curdle the milk slightly, thickening it. Sugar followed to tame the sharpness, and finally a sprinkle of spice, usually nutmeg or cinnamon. For Victorians, this wasn't just a bedtime drink, it was practically medicinal. The belief was that warm milk settled the stomach, alcohol loosened the nerves, and spices warmed the blood, helping you drift peacefully into sleep. It was also something of a social ritual. Families might gather by the fire, trading quiet conversation while the posset pot simmered on the hob. You take your first sip, and it's thicker than you expect, almost like a custard, coating your tongue in a velvety blanket. There's an echo of sweetness, followed by a whisper of malt from the ale. The nutmeg dances in at the end, making the whole experience feel like dessert you drink. The mainstream medical community of the time encouraged such concoctions, at least in moderation. They believed the slow release of warmth through the body encouraged drowsiness, especially in those plagued by what they called nervous wakefulness. But not everyone agreed. Historians still argue whether the small dose of alcohol helped or actually disrupted sleep. Modern science would tell you alcohol fragments deep sleep cycles, but the Victorians didn't have REM charts. They had intuition, and intuition said warm plus mildly tipsy, oh, sleepy. Of course, there were quirks to the ritual. In certain households, possets were made with beer instead of ale, or fortified wine instead of table wine, producing a more potent brew. Some cooks even added egg yolks, creating a drink so thick you could practically eat it with a spoon. And for the especially sleepless, an extra splash of liquor might find its way in. For the heart, as they'd winkingly claim. You can imagine the scene, the flicker of candlelight bouncing off silver spoons, the faint hiss from the kettle, and the soft creak of chairs as everyone leaned forward, both to hear each other and to be closer to the heat. The posset was as much about slowing the evening down as it was about inducing sleep. Every step, the stirring, the sipping, the lazy chatter, was a cue to your mind that it was time to let go. But in typical Victorian fashion, there were some less charming details. Milk wasn't always fresh, especially in summer. Without refrigeration, the quality of your drink could range from divine to questionable. And there's the ale. Brewing hygiene varied wildly, and some batches could leave you more awake than before, clutching your stomach and regretting every sip. There was also the class divide. While middle and upper classes could afford fresh spices and quality dairy, the poor often made mock posset, essentially warm water, with whatever scraps of milk or beer were available. It lacked the richness, but still carried the idea of bedtime comfort. The placebo effect, it seems, was alive and well in Victorian kitchens. Still, the posset had staying power. Even Queen Victoria herself reportedly enjoyed warm milk at night, though hers was likely uncurdled and presented on a silver tray by liveried servants. You set the empty cup down, and the aftertaste lingers, a gentle sweetness, a shadow of spice. Your eyelids feel heavier, but whether it's from the drink or the ritual, you can't quite tell. The room seems quieter now. The fire in the grate has collapsed into a bed of embers, glowing like the last heartbeat of the day. Outside, the streets are nearly silent. Even the clop of distant hooves has faded. Somewhere deep in your mind, you think of how modern bedtime routines lack this kind of slow elegance. We rush, we scroll, we multitask, even as we try to relax. But here, in this imagined Victorian room, the posset forces you to pause. You can't rush hot milk. It demands patience. You can't check your messages because, well, they don't exist. And in that stillness, your thoughts stretch out like a cat in a patch of sunlight. You feel the warmth travel down through your chest, settling in your stomach like a promise. The nutmeg's perfume hovers near your senses, even as your head tilts slightly, the world beginning to blur at the edges. And yet, just before you drift, you remember, there's more to try. More peculiar cures, more strange comforts, each promising to be the one that finally sends you into the deep, undisturbed Victorian slumber everyone back then seemed to crave. You push the empty porcelain cup away, the taste of warm milk and ale still clinging faintly to your tongue, and let yourself sink deeper into the night. The room is quiet now, almost expectant, as if waiting for the next peculiar offering in this slow parade of sleep cures. Then from the corner you hear a faint click, whir, click. Your eyes adjust to find an oddly mechanical shape looming near the bed, a contraption of polished wood, brass gears, and a padded frame. At first glance, it looks like the skeleton of an upright piano, tipped on its back. In truth, it's the work of a particularly eccentric Victorian inventor, a clockwork sleep machine. You lie back cautiously on the bed frame it's attached to, feeling the gentle press of the mattress beneath you. A uniform ticking begins somewhere inside the device. Then, almost imperceptibly, the bed rocks. Forward, back, forward again, just enough to make you think of a boat drifting on calm water. Victorian advertisements claimed this mechanical cradle could reproduce the soothing motion of a ship at anchor, a mother's arms, or even a lazy summer hammock. You were meant to surrender yourself to its rhythm, the swaying coaxing your mind into that half-dream state where thoughts drift like leaves on a stream. The machine's creator, a Mr. Samuel Hartley of Leeds, insisted his invention was based on sound medical principles. Gentle motion, he argued, lulled infants to sleep. Why shouldn't it do the same for adults? To prove his point, he had it patented in 1878 and demonstrated it in drawing rooms across the country. Mainstream medical journals gave polite but cautious nods to the idea. The rocking might help, they admitted, though historians still argue whether the effect came from actual neurological changes or from sheer novelty. As you settle into the motion, you notice a quiet hum from the gearing, a sort of low purr that blends with the creak of the frame. It's hypnotic in its own way, though occasionally interrupted by a faint mechanical hiccup when the winding mechanism shifts. Hartley claimed the sound itself was part of the magic, a soft percussion for the mind, as one advertisement put it. The bed's movement is subtle, less than an inch in either direction, but over time your body starts to anticipate it. The sensation is almost like breathing with the room, each sway a slow inhale, each return a long exhale. Of course, not all versions of the sleep machine were created equal. In cheaper models, the rocking was jerky, the gears squealed, and the frame clattered so much you'd think you were sleeping inside a grandfather clock. Some even tipped dangerously if placed on uneven floors, sending the poor insomniac rolling sideways into the wall. Then there's the fringe theory that swirled among certain Victorian magnetotherapists. They claimed the repetitive motion could reset the flow of magnetic energy in the body, aligning it for perfect rest. No one could quite explain how rocking accomplished this, but it sounded just plausible enough to be printed in pamphlets. You close your eyes and let the rhythm carry you. The walls seem to breathe along with you, the patterned wallpaper blurring into shadows. Outside, a breeze rattles the glass slightly, and for a moment the rocking syncs with that soft sound, a duet of wind and clockwork. There's something else, too. In the half-sleep space this machine creates, your mind begins to wander. You imagine yourself on the deck of a sailing ship, lanterns swinging gently overhead, the smell of salt and tar in the air. Or perhaps You're in a summer garden hammock, dappled light shifting through leaves, the air warm against your cheek. The Victorian machine doesn't know it's planting these images, but your brain does. And maybe that's the real secret here. The rocking, the whirring, the gentle ticking, they give your restless thoughts a rhythm to follow. You're no longer counting worries or tomorrow's tasks. You're counting the seconds between each slow sway. Some users swore the effect was immediate, that they drifted off before the machine's winding even ran down. Others complained it only made them seasick. And still, enough swore by it that Hartley's rocking beds continued to appear in advertisements well into the 1890s. The machine begins to slow, its gears clicking in a softer, more drawn-out pattern. The rocking fades to nothing, and for a moment you miss it, the stillness suddenly feeling too still. But in the echo of that motion, you realize your heartbeat has matched its rhythm, slower now, steadier, as if your body has learned a new lullaby. You open your eyes to the dim room once more, the faint scent of oil from the machine mingling with the last traces of nutmeg from your earlier drink. Somewhere beyond the glass the city sleeps, or at least pretends to. And you, just barely awake, are ready for the next odd Victorian idea that promises to pull you further toward dreams. The machine's ticking has faded into memory, replaced by a sharper, almost medicinal scent hanging faintly in the air. It's not unpleasant. Clean in a way that prickles your nose, like walking past a cupboard of mothballs or rubbing your hands with a mentholated balm. You glance at the bed and notice something tucked neatly under the pillow, a small cloth pouch, its corners frayed, its shape uneven. Inside, you discover the source, solid white crystals of camphor. Victorians swore by camphor as a cure for sleeplessness, though no two people seemed to agree on why it worked. Some insisted its strong aroma cleared the head and pushed away wandering thoughts. Others said it acted as a mild sedative, soothing the nerves by way of the senses. You lie back and let the scent surround you, cool and crisp, as if a frost had settled on your pillow. Camphor was a luxury for much of the 19th century, imported from camphor laurel trees in Asia. In wealthier homes, it arrived in small carved boxes, sometimes in decorative balls that could be placed under pillows, in drawers, or worn around the neck in a perforated pendant. In humbler homes, it might come as unpolished chunks, wrapped in muslin or tucked into paper. You take a deeper breath, and the vapors fill your sinuses with a sensation that's both invigorating and oddly calming. Mainstream Victorian medicine approved of camphor for various ailments, everything from fainting spells to fevers, and recommended it for nervous agitation before bed. But historians still argue whether it was the scent, the placebo effect, or the fact that camphor's mild toxicity might actually dull mental activity in small doses. There were fringe beliefs, too. A few early spiritualists claimed camphor repelled night spirits that whispered to the sleepless, which sounds less like a medical cure and more like a bedtime ghost story. Others thought it aligned the body's vapors in the same way a brisk walk in winter air might, though without leaving the comfort of your quilts. As you rest there, the scent seems to sharpen your awareness at first. You notice the faint creak of the settling house, the slow pop of the fire dying down to embers. Gradually, though, that alertness tilts toward a peculiar stillness. Your thoughts feel lighter, as if their edges have been sanded down, Not everyone reacted this way. In some cases, camphora's stimulant qualities outweighed its sedative ones, leaving users more awake than before, eyes wide, mind humming. There were even whispered warnings about camphor dreams, vivid, strange visions that could arrive in the small hours, filled with distorted faces or surreal landscapes. Victorians, being Victorians, alternated between finding this fascinating and quietly terrifying. You run your fingers along the cloth pouch again, feeling the hard crystals shift inside. The scent clings to your fingertips, cooling them ever so slightly. It's easy to see the appeal. No preparation, no brewing, no mechanical winding. Just place it beneath your head and breathe. Of course, there was a social dimension to it, too. In certain circles, the smell of camphor was considered genteel, a sign that one had access to imported goods and the latest healthful fads. Guests might remark upon it in the bedroom, assuming their host cared about both hygiene and refinement. You close your eyes, and the fragrance seems to weave itself into your breathing. Inhale, cool, resinous, clean. Exhale, warmth leaving your body, muscles loosening into the mattress. There's no sensation of sinking this time, just a steady float, as though the air itself has softened. Somewhere, deep in the haze between wakefulness and sleep, you recall that camphor also served as a moth deterrent. Perhaps your Victorian counterpart liked the idea that, while they drifted toward dreams, the same scent kept their blankets safe from nibbling intruders. Multi-purpose comfort, you think, with a sleepy smile. Your mind drifts briefly to the other cures waiting in the shadows of this imagined bedroom, each one peculiar, each one promising rest. But for now, the camphor holds its place, a silent guardian in the hollow of your pillow, its icy perfume cooling the restless edges of your thoughts. The camphor's cool edge still lingers in your senses, but now your gaze shifts to a curious object resting on the dressing table, a polished brass circlet gleaming faintly in the low light. It's heavier than it looks, and when you lift it, the cool metal presses firmly into your palms. A folded pamphlet beside it reads in bold lettering, Dr. Wharton's Cranial Pressure Crown. Balance the mind for restful sleep. You lower yourself into the chair by the fire, fitting the band snugly around your head. It sits low across your temples, its smooth arc interrupted by small decorative knobs that look a bit like tiny rivets, but are, according to the pamphlet, calibrated pressure points. The weight is immediately noticeable, about the heft of a well-made saucepan lid, but not painful. Instead, it creates a strange awareness of your skull, as if your thoughts are being gently contained. Victorian health culture adored devices like this. Mainstream doctors might have been skeptical, but they didn't dismiss the crown entirely. The theory was that applying even consistent pressure to the head could quiet the mind by reducing excessive blood flow to the brain, a concept tied to the era's fascination with cerebral congestion. Restless thoughts, they believed, were a physical symptom of too much blood in the head at bedtime. Press it back down, so to speak, and you'd drift off like a leaf in still water. You lean back, feeling the brass warm slowly against your skin. There's a faint scent of metal, mingled with whatever polish was used to keep it gleaming. The pressure is oddly reassuring, a bit like wearing a snug winter hat, though without the scratchy wool. Of course, Not everyone bought into the blood flow theory. Historians still argue whether the device's real benefit came from simple sensory focus, giving your mind a physical anchor, or from the placebo effect of believing your brain was being medically balanced. There's even a fringe opinion that the slight compression could stimulate certain cranial nerves, triggering a relaxation response. You close your eyes, imagining the types of people who might have used such a contraption. Wealthy insomniacs reclining in plush armchairs, the fire casting golden light over the curve of brass. Earnest, middle-class clerks sitting upright at kitchen tables, their crowns catching the lamplight while they dutifully followed the pamphlet's instructions. Even eccentric inventors testing variations with heavier metals or adjustable weights. Some versions were lined with soft leather for comfort, others with thin felt to avoid the cold shock of metal on skin. There were cheaper imitations too, painted tin bands that tarnished quickly and left an unflattering gray line on the forehead. In all cases, the device was meant to be worn for 15 to 20 minutes before bed, though some users swore they needed to keep it on until they were fully asleep. As the brass warms further, you find your awareness narrowing. The day's thoughts begin to feel slower, less restless. It's as though the crown has closed a lid over the bubbling pot of your brain. You shift slightly in the chair and feel the band's weight tug against gravity, reminding you it's still there, still working, or at least still convincing you it is. Yet there's an undeniable theatricality to it. Imagine announcing to your household, "I shall now put on my sleeping crown." It's part ritual, part performance, and perhaps that's the point. In a world where most cures were wrapped in ceremony, whether brewing a posset or winding a rocking bed, this was another way of telling your mind, it's time to stop. You open your eyes and catch your reflection in the glass of the darkened window. The brass glints faintly, a halo of sorts, though heavier and less angelic. Somewhere in the quiet, the fire gives a lazy crackle, and you wonder if perhaps the Victorians understood something modern life forgets. That the act of preparing for sleep, no matter how strange the tool, can be as powerful as the cure itself. With a slow exhale, you remove the crown, placing it carefully back on the table. For a moment, your head feels lighter, as if the thoughts inside have been pressed into a calmer shape. Whether that's real or imagined doesn't matter. You're already sinking deeper into the night. The brass crown leaves a faint memory of weight on your temples, but as you return to the bed, you notice something different beneath the quilt. The mattress itself feels uneven. You pull back the covers and see that the ticking fabric is just slightly lumpy, with seams faintly puckered here and there. A salty, briny scent rises the moment you press your palm into it, like the ghost of a summer tide. You've stumbled onto another Victorian experiment in insomnia relief, the seaweed stuffed mattress. It's exactly what it sounds like. Instead of horsehair, straw, or pure feathers, this mattress is filled with dried kelp, harvested from coastal waters, rinsed, sun-dried, and packed tight beneath linen ticking. The theory was that seaweed, once dried, retained subtle marine vapors, thought to calm the nerves and purify the air around the sleeper. For seaside Victorians, it was an easy claim to make. The health resorts of the era already touted sea air as a tonic for all manner of ailments. You lower yourself onto the bed, and the seaweed shifts slightly under your weight, releasing another faint breath of the shore. It's not the strong, fishy tang you might expect. more like the mineral clean scent of rocks left wet by the tide. Mainstream physicians were lukewarm on the idea, but they didn't dismiss it entirely. The coastal air cure was hugely fashionable, and bringing a piece of the seaside indoors had an undeniable romantic appeal. Some Victorians even believed that the trace iodine in the seaweed could evaporate into the air as you slept, subtly strengthening your health. Historians still argue whether the levels were anywhere near enough to matter, or if it was simply the power of suggestion wrapped in linen. Fringe pamphlets went further, claiming that seaweed absorbed nervous vapors from the body, drawing out restlessness the way certain poultices were said to draw out illness. You stretch out fully, letting your head sink into the pillow. The mattress has a firmness to it, not as soft as feathers, but not as unyielding as straw. Each shift of your body presses more of that faintly oceanic scent into the air. You close your eyes and for a moment imagine the hush of waves against a breakwater, the pull and release of the tide mirroring your breathing. It wasn't just the scent that made this bed unusual. It was the sound. Seaweed filling had a subtle crackle when you moved, like a distant whisper of surf on pebbles. Some found it soothing, others found it maddening, especially if they shared the bed with someone prone to tossing and turning. And as with most Victorian innovations, quality varied. The best seaweed mattresses came from reputable coastal suppliers who dried and cleaned their harvest carefully. The worst came from opportunists stuffing ticking with barely rinsed kelp, leading to dampness, rot, or unwelcome guests in the form of sand fleas. A poorly made one could turn your bedroom into a briny nightmare. Still, for those who believed in it, the seaweed mattress was more than just bedding. It was an atmosphere. You didn't just sleep on it, you slept in a seaside fantasy. The briny perfume was a constant reminder of holidays in Brighton, brisk walks along the pier, or the wild spray of a storm on the coast. You shift again, listening to the faint, dry murmur beneath you. It's easy to see how someone might associate this with peace, especially in a world where most people's lives were lived far from the ocean. In the flickering firelight, you almost believe you hear gulls calling, though perhaps that's just the house settling in the wind. The air feels cooler now, the scent of camphor from earlier mingling with the faint salt of the bed. The effect is strange, clean, but layered, like a dream composed of two different landscapes. You breathe in deeply, and your body feels as though it's exhaling into the mattress, letting it carry away the tension the day has left behind. You wonder, not for the first time tonight, whether the Victorians really believed in the science of these things, or whether the act of believing was the true medicine. Either way, the seaweed bed holds you. The faint sea and its fibers offering up the suggestion of a tide you can't quite see, but can almost hear in the space between your heartbeats. The sea's whisper fades as you shift onto your side, and that's when you notice something soft and pale draped over the bedpost. A simple linen nightcap. At first glance, it's nothing remarkable. Light, thin, with a slightly pointed crown and ties long enough to knot under your chin. But as you pick it up, the scent hits you. Sweet, floral, and unmistakable. Lavender. Victorians adored lavender. They used it in soaps, sachets, wardrobe fresheners, and even to scent the air at funerals. But here, its purpose is strictly for sleep. This particular cap has been soaked in lavender oil and left to dry. The fiber is now infused with a fragrance meant to wrap your head and your mind. In calm, you slide it on, feeling the smooth linen cool against your scalp. Almost instantly, the scent blooms around you, soft yet insistent, a kind of perfume cloud that doesn't drift away but settles in like a quiet guest. Mainstream Victorian medicine approved of lavender for nervous complaints and mild insomnia. Doctors might not have known about its chemical compounds, but they saw the results. Patients said they felt calmer, less fidgety, more ready to drift. Historians still argue whether the effect was chemical, psychological, or simply part of a larger ritual that cued the body for rest. You lie back, letting the lavender halo follow you into the pillow. The fragrance folds over itself in layers. First a bright note, almost like citrus, then a warmer, hay-like undertone. Each breath feels slower than the last. The Victorians believed these oils worked best when close to the skin, warmed gently by body heat, hence the nightcap, instead of a distant sachet on the dresser. Of course, the practice had its quirks. Some caps were oversaturated, leaving the wearer with oil-stained hair and an aroma so strong it bordered on medicinal assault. Others were lined with fine wool or flannel for winter use, holding in heat as well as scent. A cozy combination if you liked warmth, less so if you didn't. There were fringe variations too. A few enthusiasts combined lavender with dried hops sewn into the cap's lining, creating what they called double scent sleepwear. Hops, also believed to encourage drowsiness, brought a bitter, beer-like note to the mix. To modern noses, that combination might smell like a floral brewery, but Victorians swore by it. You adjust the ties under your chin and close your eyes. The cap creates a faint pressure over your ears, muffling the outside world just enough to make the room feel more private, more yours. Somewhere in the dark, the fire lets out a soft crackle, and you breathe in the lavender again, letting it expand through your senses like ink in water. The image of summer fields rises in your mind, rows of purple flowers swaying in a warm wind, bees moving lazily from bloom to bloom. The scene is so vivid, you almost hear the hum, though that might just be the faint ring in your ears from the quiet. Not everyone used nightcaps for fragrance. Many still wore them purely for warmth, especially in drafty houses. But adding lavender turned a practical garment into a small piece of sensory theater, one that carried the promise of sleep in every thread. You imagine the ritual, dipping the cap in oil earlier in the day, wringing it gently, and leaving it to dry in a line by the window so the breeze could tame its potency. By evening, it would be ready, softened, scented, and waiting like a personal lullaby you could wear. As the linen warms against your head, the scent grows rounder, less sharp. You realize your breathing has slowed again, as if your lungs have learned to pace themselves with the fragrance. The rest of the room recedes, the seaweed mattress beneath you, the camphore's ghost still lingering somewhere near the pillow. For this moment, it's just lavender, soft linen, and the quiet ache of your body finally beginning to give in. The lavender's sweetness still clings faintly to you as you stir, though the air in the room feels subtly different now, charged, as if the atmosphere itself has a faint buzz. At the foot of the bed sits an object that looks like a cross between a hand-crank music box and a feather duster, the so-called electric feather tickler. It's an odd-looking contraption, A slim wooden handle connects to a small brass cylinder, and from one end, delicate ostrich plumes fan outward. A cord trails from the device toward a squat battery box, the kind that would have been considered cutting edge in the late 19th century. The Victorians were obsessed with electricity, less for its lighting potential than for its supposed ability to cure nearly anything, including sleeplessness. You pick it up, half expecting the feathers to sway on their own. When you thumb the small brass lever, a faint hum begins. The plumes tremble almost imperceptibly, and then, when you touch them to your forearm, you feel it, the tiniest tingling, like static from a freshly laundered shirt. The sensation is both ridiculous and strangely pleasant. In its mildest setting, the tickler was meant to soothe the nerves, the idea being that a gentle electrical stimulation could release tension and distract the mind from racing thoughts. Mainstream doctors were skeptical, but they didn't entirely dismiss it. After all, galvanic devices were already being used in certain medical treatments. Historians still argue whether these home gadgets offered any genuine benefit or whether their magic lay purely in novelty and the placebo effect. You run the plumes lightly across your palm, feeling that odd microbuzz follow the touch. Imagine this in a dim Victorian bedroom. The flicker of candlelight reflecting on brass, the faint hum of early battery cells, the smell of oiled wood mingling with the other scents already filling the room. The tickler would be drawn in gentle arcs along the arms, neck, or even the scalp, lulling the user into a half-dream state. Of course, there were fringe claims, too. Some pamphlets insisted the device realigned the body's magnetic currents, while others claimed it opened invisible pores in the skin through which rest might enter. The language was vague, grand, and utterly convincing to those who wanted to believe. Not every user was careful, though. Turn the setting too high, and the pleasant tingle became a sharp snap, enough to jolt you wide awake. There were even stories, probably exaggerated, of people ending up with frizzed hair from overzealous scalp treatments. Still, in the right hands, the effect could be hypnotic. You trail the feathers along your wrist and then across your collarbone, the sensation so light it almost registers as sound. A faint crackle inside your skin. It's not so different from being half tickled, half massaged, and in that odd liminal state, your brain seems content to wander away from wakefulness. You can see why some Victorians found this ritual appealing. It wasn't passive like a scent or a heated bed. It was participatory, requiring focus and intention. In a way, the tickler became less about electricity and more about touch, something intimate, even if delivered by a brass and battery gadget. The hum grows softer as the battery begins to fade. You place the device back on the table, its plumes still quivering slightly from residual charge. Your fingertips tingle faintly, and for a moment, the room feels like it's holding its breath. The silence that follows is deep and warm, as if the air itself has been smoothed flat. You let your head fall back onto the pillow, the ghost of lavender brushing past your nose, the salty whisper of the seaweed mattress beneath you, and now, layered on top, the subtle afterglow of the electric feather tickler fading slowly into nothing. The air still carries that faint metallic tang from the electric tickler when you hear a soft clink from the nightstand, a glass stopper being eased from a bottle. Your eyes find the source, a slender frosted decanter with a deep violet label reading Dr. Battersby's Dream Tonic. The Victorians were nothing if not inventive in the liquid sleep department. While some potions were harmless herb blends, others, well, let's just say you better hope your 19th century pharmacist had a steady moral compass. This particular tonic claims to be a gentle persuasion to the land of Nod. But one look at the ingredients list, printed in the tiniest script, tells another story. Laudanum, valerian, chamomile, and something coyly labeled as soothing cordial. You pull the stopper, and a wave of warm, syrupy scent escapes. Part molasses, part crushed flowers, with a faint medicinal sharpness beneath. Victorians didn't sip these tonics for taste. They drank them for effect. And this one would have delivered laudanum. An opium tincture was a widely accepted and alarmingly common remedy for insomnia. Mainstream medical advice cautioned moderation, though moderation in Victorian terms often meant doses that would leave a modern doctor pale. Historians still argue whether its popularity came more from its actual sedative power or from the comforting ritual of measuring, sipping, and surrendering to its warmth. You pour a small amount into a short glass, the liquid catching the light like caramelized honey. In the quiet room, you imagine the countless bedrooms where such tonics sat ready, lined up beside hairbrushes, spectacles, and folded letters. A nightly measure became part of the rhythm, like winding the clock or banking the fire. The first sip is heavy and sweet, the kind of sweetness that coats your tongue and insists on staying. Beneath it lurks an earthy bitterness, likely from the valerian root, a plant long associated with relaxation. The warmth creeps downward with every swallow, a slow motion spill through your chest and into your stomach. Of course, not all dream tonics were as effective or as honest. Some patent sleep drafts contained little more than colored sugar water, relying on the power of suggestion. Others doubled down on stimulants in the morning version, creating a cycle that kept customers dependent on both bottles. There's a fringe story you've heard. A country apothecary who added gold leaf to his tonic, claiming the shimmer would draw the moon's restful influence into the drinker's mind. His customers swore it worked, but skeptics suspected they were more dazzled by the floating flecks than any lunar magic. You take another slow sip, imagining the soft clink of the glass against porcelain lips in dim lamplight, the heavy eyelids, the slight sway of someone already halfway to sleep before they've even set the glass down. The tonic's warmth now feels like a blanket under your skin, smoothing out the day's sharper edges. Some Victorians, wary of laudanum's addictive reputation, diluted their tonics with warm milk or barley water. Others swore by taking it neat, claiming the swift descent into slumber was worth any morning grogginess. The glass is empty now. You replace it on the table and fit the stopper back into the bottle, listening to the faint pop as it seals. The room seems softer, edges blurred. The lavender cap's fragrance is just a ghost now. The seaweed mattress breathes quietly beneath you, and the electric tickler's tingle has long since faded. It's tempting to close your eyes right here, but you sense there's still more waiting in the shadows of this Victorian night. And so you let the tonic's gentle pull settle into your bones, carrying you just a fraction deeper toward the strange and wonderful cures still ahead. The tonic's warmth is still spreading through you when a faint draft brushes your cheek, carrying with it the smell of something sharp and resinous, like pine needles steeped in winter air. You glance toward the far corner and see a squat iron stand topped with what looks like a shallow copper dish. Beneath it, a small blue flame flickers, casting long, restless shadows against the wallpaper. You realize it's a camphor sleep burner, a curious hybrid of aromatherapy and 19th century gadgetry. Victorians loved camphor for its invigorating smell and supposed medicinal magic. It was considered both a stimulant and a sedative, depending, oddly enough, on how it was used. In low doses, inhaled gently over time, it was said to quiet restless thoughts and ease breathing. Mainstream medical journals of the period praised camphora's ability to calm the nerves while fortifying the constitution, though historians still argue whether that was more hopeful poetry than science. In this contraption, the copper dish holds a small block of camphor, which softens and vaporizes over the heat. The scent that curls through the air is cool and crystalline, almost like the sensation of peppermint, but without the sweetness. You breathe it in, and it's as though your mind momentarily clears, leaving space for drowsiness to settle. Of course, the Victorians didn't stop at simple camphor. Fringe inventors experimented with blends. Camphor mixed with crushed rose petals or even tiny shavings of sandalwood, claiming these combinations harmonize the bodily humors. One especially eccentric pamphlet described a mixture of camphor and powdered oyster shells, promising oceanic dreams unmarred by nightmare. The burner's flame wavers, and the room's scent deepens. You can almost picture a Victorian insomniac sitting up in bed, watching the vapor drift like ghostly ribbons toward the ceiling. The ritual wasn't just about the smell. It was about the act of watching something melt, dissolve, and disappear. In a time before smartphones and endless scrolling, this slow process could have been a kind of meditation. There were warnings, too. Too much camphor in a poorly ventilated space could bring headaches, dizziness, even hallucinations. Yet that didn't deter devotees. If anything, it added a touch of drama to the nightly routine. It's easy to imagine a bored aristocrat testing the limits, leaning a little closer, curious to see if dreams might arrive faster through excess. You shift on the seaweed mattress, the faint squeak of its filling blending with the low hiss of the flame. The camphor scent now mingles with the lingering sweetness of the dream tonic, creating a strange harmony. Cool on the inhale, warm on the exhale. It's almost musical. Some claimed camphor had another benefit. It masked the less pleasant smells of Victorian life. Coal smoke, damp wool, the faint must of wallpaper glue, all could be softened by this bracing fragrance. And in an age when bad air was believed to cause illness, filling your bedroom with a purifying vapor seemed not only comforting, but sensible. The block in the copper dish has shrunk to half its size, edges softened into a glossy puddle. Thin wisps rise and curl before fading into the dark. Your eyelids feel heavier now, not from the intoxicating punch of the tonic, but from the slow, hypnotic rhythm of scent and shadow. When the flame finally gutters out, a soft hush settles over the room, as if the air itself is satisfied. You pull the covers closer, inhaling one last cool breath of camphor before the scent begins its slow retreat into memory. And somewhere in the folds of that quiet, you sense the Victorians' strange truth. Sometimes the cure wasn't in the science at all, but in the careful ritual of preparing for sleep. one act at a time, until wakefulness had nowhere left to hide. The camphor's cool trace is barely lingering when you hear the faint shush of cloth against cloth. In the near dark, a woman in a high-necked nightgown is drawing something over her hands, long, pale gloves that glimmer faintly in the candlelight. At first, you think they're silk, but when she flexes her fingers, there's a faint crinkle. These are oatmeal sleep gloves, a Victorian curiosity that straddled the line between skincare and sleep aid. The idea was deceptively simple: soothe frayed nerves and restless minds by pampering the skin overnight. Mainstream domestic guides recommended them for ladies of delicate disposition, claiming that the soft, continuous contact could bring on drowsiness. Historians still argue whether this was more about comfort or the placebo effect. But in an era obsessed with both appearances and health, the overlap was almost inevitable. The process began in the kitchen or the scullery if you were wealthy enough to avoid cooking smells yourself. A thick paste was made from finely ground oatmeal, milk, and sometimes a splash of almond oil. This warm, fragrant mixture was smoothed generously over the hands before slipping them into gloves lined with the thinnest muslin. The warmth and faint weight of the gloves were said to calm the pulse, ease fidgeting, and invite the thoughts to grow still. The gloves you're looking at have an extra flourish. Tiny pockets stitched along the wrist seam, each filled with dried lavender and hops. With every movement, a whisper of herbal fragrance drifts up toward the nose, a double-layered assault on sleeplessness. You can almost smell it from here. Earthy sweetness laced with something green and just a little bitter. There's a fringe version of this treatment, too, one involving thin leather gloves painted on the inside with a paste of honey and crushed poppy seeds. The theory was that the warmth of the skin would coax out gentle vapors from the poppy, encouraging deep sleep. Whether that actually worked or just left you with sticky fingers in the morning is debatable. The woman smooths her gloves over each hand with a kind of ceremonial slowness, as if sealing in not just the oatmeal, but the very promise of rest. You realize this was part of the magic, the act of preparing, of physically layering on the night's protection, one quiet step at a time. Some Victorians swore the treatment worked best when combined with a bedtime story read aloud by a family member, or, for those without, the steady ticking of a mantel clock. The point was rhythm, a gentle repetition to match the slow infusion of comfort through the skin. You try it yourself, sliding your hands into the cool interior of the gloves. The oatmeal paste is faintly gritty, but softens quickly under your body's warmth. The muslin lining sighs against your skin. Almost immediately, you notice your fingers relaxing. The small unconscious tension you didn't even realize was there starting to dissolve. It's oddly satisfying, this combination of texture, warmth, and scent. And as you lie back, gloves in place, you start to understand why such a seemingly trivial ritual might have been someone's nightly salvation in a world without modern sleep aids. In the hush, the gloves become less of a novelty and more of a gentle weight, tethering you to the present, keeping your thoughts from wandering too far, too fast. You imagine dozens of dim Victorian bedrooms, each with their own pair resting neatly on a nightstand, waiting for the nightly ceremony. Somewhere, a clock chimes the quarter hour. The oatmeal mixture continues its slow work. The gloves trapping the warmth, the scent weaving its way into the edges of your thoughts. The room feels smaller, cozier, as though the gloves themselves are drawing the walls closer, not in a claustrophobic way, but in a safe, cocooned sort of embrace. And just as your eyelids begin to drift lower, you sense there's still one more curious object waiting in the shadows, something less delicate, more mechanical, humming softly to itself. The hum is subtle at first, barely a tremor beneath the night stillness, but the longer you listen, the more you can feel it in the bones of the floor. Your eyes drift toward the foot of the bed, where a low, boxy contraption rests on 4 squat legs. It looks vaguely like a footstool, except that thin tendrils of steam curl lazily from a brass vent on its top. This is a steam foot cradler, a peculiar Victorian attempt to merge warmth, weight, and the hypnotic effects of vapor into one insomnia fighting device. Mainstream accounts praise the healthful influence of gently heated feet, citing improved blood circulation and a calmer nervous system. Physicians of the era claimed that warming the extremities could draw the restless humors downward, making the mind light and airy, ready for sleep. Historians still argue whether these physiological claims held water or if the device simply worked because, well, warm feet feel nice. You slip your legs under the covers until your toes find the open semicircle at the front of the machine. Inside, padded arches cradle each foot separately like cupped hands. The warmth is immediate, not the scalding rush of hot water, but a steady, even heat that seeps into your skin. The trick lies in the internal reservoir, a hidden copper basin filled with water, brought to a gentle simmer by a small alcohol lamp. As the water heats, steam rises and passes through layers of fragrant herbs, often rosemary, thyme, or crushed mint, before escaping through the vents. You inhale, and the scent is sharper than the camphor earlier, tinged with something green and almost culinary. Wealthier households sometimes upgraded their foot cradlers with miniature music boxes tucked into the side. So the warming session came with a tinkling lullaby. Fringe inventors got more eccentric still, adding small hinged trays to hold sleep biscuits, infused with valerian or chamomile. The idea being that you'd nibble between foot steamings. The steam curls around your ankles, wrapping them in an invisible shawl. You can feel each muscle in your calves loosening, the tiny aches from the day dissolving as if coaxed away by unseen fingers. In the background, the faint hiss and pop of the alcohol flame becomes its own metronome, slower than a heartbeat, steadier than your thoughts. One pamphlet from the 1870s claimed that a nightly steam foot cradle could banish even the most stubborn visions of wakefulness if paired with the dim light of a single beeswax candle. The reasoning was unscientific, but strangely poetic. Warm feet, warm glow, warm dreams. Of course, there were risks. Leave the device unattended, and you could wake to scorched bedding. Or, in one unfortunate case, a slightly singed cat that had tried to nap inside the vent. Still, accidents were rare enough that the foot cradler remained a staple in certain well-to-do bedrooms, until electric heating pads took over in the early 20th century. As your toes bask in their miniature sauna, you notice how the sensation creeps upward, blurring the line between physical comfort and mental ease. It's almost as if the warmth is rewriting your body's priorities. Stop thinking. Start resting. The herbs lend a faint drowsiness of their own, a green echo of the dream tonic from earlier. You lean back, letting the steam's rhythm match your breathing. The air in the room feels heavier now, not unpleasantly so, just enough to make each movement deliberate, each blink slower than the last. Somewhere beyond the walls, a carriage rattles past, wheels clattering against cobblestone. You barely register it. The foot cradler hums on, patient and loyal, a small stubborn fire in the quiet night. And just before your thoughts can slide entirely into dreams, a glimmer of something silvery catches your eye from the bedside table, an object far less warm, yet equally strange in its promise of sleep. The gleam is faint but unmistakable, a polished silvery disk lying half buried in the shadows at the edge of your bedside table. At first, you think it's just a decorative hand mirror, but as you draw it closer, you see the surface is not reflective glass at all. Instead, it's a plate of thin, hammered tin, engraved with swirling patterns that catch the candlelight in restless, shifting arcs. This is the lunarium disc, a fringe Victorian insomnia cure that strayed far from mainstream medicine and squarely into the realm of mystical gadgetry. Its inventor, a gentleman naturalist named Percival Henningsworth, claimed that the human mind could be coaxed into slumber by sympathetic moon resonance. The method? You were to stare at the disc in low light, letting your gaze follow the whirls and spirals until your eyelids grew heavy. Mainstream medical journals of the time dismissed it outright as bizarre and wholly unscientific. Still, the lunarium gained a small but loyal following among spiritualists, night poets, and those who found the slow dance of light across its curves soothing. Historians still argue whether Henningsworth genuinely believed in lunar resonance or simply stumbled onto a Victorian form of visual meditation. You tilt it slightly, and the patterns seem to ripple, as if the metal itself were breathing. The engraved lines are shallow but precise, drawing the eye inward toward a small central circle no bigger than a coin. You can imagine sitting here in a gas-lit bedroom, the disc propped up just so, its glow becoming the only point of focus in the entire world. Henningsworth's pamphlet advised pairing the disc with a cup of warm milk steeped in lunar herbs, such as mugwort or night-blooming jasmine, claiming this would align the humors with the celestial cycle. Fringe believers even kept their discs on windowsills during full moons, convinced the light would charge them with sleep-inducing energy. You try it just for a moment. Let your gaze follow one spiral outward, then another inward. The flicker of candlelight shifts over the surface, slow and hypnotic. You feel your breathing deepen without thinking about it, the edges of the room softening until all that remains is the disc and the steady pulse of your own heartbeat. Some who used the lunarium spoke of gentle dreams that followed, visions tinted in silvery light, where conversations were hushed and footsteps made no sound. Others claimed no dreams at all, just a heavy velvety darkness that held until morning. And then, of course, there were skeptics who called it nothing more than a shiny plate and a good excuse to stare at nothing. Yet as you set the disc back down, you can't quite dismiss the odd tranquility it brings. Even without moon resonance, there's something ancient and almost primal about letting your mind circle the same path over and over, each loop smoothing the day's sharper thoughts. The candle on your nightstand flickers lower, its flame crouching close to the wick. In that quiet, you sense another presence in the room, not a person, but something soft and faintly rustling from the far corner. It's not metallic, not steaming, but it moves, swaying ever so slightly, and carries the faint scent of crushed leaves and distant rain. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust, but there it is, hanging from a simple iron hook in the corner, a cascade of pale fabric and tiny stitched bundles swaying in the faint draft from the open window. You'd think it was laundry at first glance, except laundry doesn't give off a perfume like this. Something green, almost medicinal, with a hint of rain on warm stone. It feels like the scent is already tiptoeing into your lungs, rearranging the clutter in your head. This is a sleep garland, a peculiar Victorian blend of aromatherapy and bedroom decor, strung together in a way that feels half scientific experiment, half whimsical craft project. Mainstream Victorians might hang sachets of lavender or rose near their pillows, but these garlands took the idea to theatrical extremes. Instead of a single scent, they combined several: bundles of hops, sprigs of chamomile, and crushed balm leaves sewn into little muslin pouches, each suspended from ribbons, so they could twirl gently with the faintest whisper of air. The effect was meant to be slow and subtle, like a song you barely notice is stuck in your head. You don't smell it so much as you find yourself breathing differently. Household guides of the time swore by their air-purifying and mood-settling properties, and there was a kind of ritual to maintaining them. Every few nights you were meant to squeeze each pouch just enough to bruise the herbs inside, waking them up. Medical opinion, of course, was split. One 1881 journal declared hops to be a soporific fit for the most troubled mind, while another sniffed that it was merely the farmer's crop made fashionable. Historians still argue whether the popularity of these garlands came from genuine effect or simply the comforting, almost meditative process of making them. After all, there's something satisfying about tying a neat ribbon or arranging herbs in little bundles while the rest of the house sleeps. You step closer. The garland sways slightly either from the draft or from your movement. Your fingertips graze one of the pouches, rough fabric, a little frayed at the edges. The muslin is faintly warm, as though it's been holding on to the day's sunlight, and when you give it the gentlest squeeze, the air around you blooms with chamomile's dry apple-sweet note. Somewhere beneath it, hops add a faint bitterness, grounding the sweetness like a shadow in a painting. You picture a Victorian insomniac, maybe in a lace nightcap, maybe pacing their creaky floorboards, reaching up in the middle of the night to give the garland a small nudge, releasing another wave of scent into the heavy air. Perhaps they believed that every twirl of ribbon was a step closer to sleep, a physical act that signaled to the mind, "You're safe now. You can rest." Not all garlands were so simple. The fringe variations could get elaborate. Some included rare imports like dried orange blossom from the Mediterranean, or shavings of sandalwood shipped from India. Others, favored by amateur botanists, would hang small glass vials of floral waters alongside the pouches, releasing a slow drip onto the herbs below to refresh their vigor. One eccentric railway magnate reportedly had an entire headboard fitted with these garlands, so that every movement in bed set off a gentle wave of perfume. His guests apparently left feeling unusually rested, or possibly just overwhelmed by the smell. The design also served a social function. In an era where visitors might be shown to your bedroom as part of a home tour, privacy being a far more fluid concept, a sleep garland was a conversation starter, proof that you were both fashionable and health conscious. Friends could swap recipes for herb blends the way we might trade playlists today. And yes, some people cheated, filling the pouches with cheap potpourri and hoping no one would notice. You close your eyes and inhale again, letting the scent wrap around your thoughts like a soft scarf. The air feels thicker now, but in a way that cushions rather than smothers. You sway a little, matching the garland's rhythm, until it feels like the whole room is breathing with you. A tiny joke bubbles up in your mind. This thing is basically a Victorian air freshener with delusions of grandeur, but you let it dissolve in the quiet. In the half-dark, the pouch's outlines blur into one continuous shape, a pale ribbon that seems to curve and bend in ways the hook shouldn't allow. For a drowsy second, you think it's leaning toward you. An illusion, surely, but one that makes you smile. The smell seems stronger now, as though it's noticed your attention. You imagine lying down beneath it, the pouches swaying overhead, the scent settling over you in invisible layers. You can almost hear the whisper of dried leaves shifting in their fabric shells, a sound as soft as breathing. In the Victorian mind, this was more than sleep science. It was a talisman, a shield against the chaos of restless nights. Whether it worked or not, who can say? Maybe the point was never the herbs themselves, but the belief that you'd done something, however small, to court rest. Behind you, the candle gives its last gasp and dies, plunging the room into shadow. The garland becomes just a darker shape in the darkness, its perfume now your only map of where it hangs. And in that moment of perfect dark, your eyes catch something else, low and glinting on the floorboards beside the bed. Not warm, not fragrant, but precise, mechanical, and ready to hum with a very different kind of lullaby. The glint on the floorboard sharpens as your eyes adjust, resolving into the polished brass of a small boxy device. At first, you think it might be a jewelry case, the sort that snaps shut with a prim little click. But then you notice the tiny crank on the side and the circular perforations across its top, holes like the breathing spots of some clockwork creature. You kneel, feeling the cool floorboards under your knees, and run a fingertip along the edge. It's smooth, cold, and unexpectedly heavy when you lift it. This, you realize, is a Victorian mechanical lullaby box, a curious blend of music box engineering and what we'd now call white noise therapy. Modern sleep apps might give you ocean waves or rainforest birdsong, but here, in the dim lamplight, you have something infinitely more tactile. The idea was simple. A patient would wind the crank before bed, releasing a slow-turning cylinder inside. As it rotated, tiny pins would pluck tuned metal combs, producing soft, repetitive notes. Sometimes a simple melody, other times a shimmer of random tones meant to mimic the drift of wind through trees. You turn the crank gently. The resistance is firm, springy, and you imagine some Victorian hand doing exactly the same 100 years ago, winding just enough for the mechanism to play through the night. There's a click, a pause, and then sound. Not quite music, not quite static. The notes seem to wander without hurry, each one melting into the next before you've fully registered it. It's the kind of sound that makes you forget you're listening at all, until you stop and notice the quiet. In 1894, a London physician named Dr. Ellery wrote an entire pamphlet praising these devices for their capacity to untether the mind from anxious thought. He argued that, unlike reading or drinking warm milk, the lullaby box required no effort, just presence. The patient didn't need to follow a plot or sit politely. They could simply let their ears do the work while their brains surrendered. Other doctors scoffed, calling it an indulgence for the wealthy. Historians still argue whether the real benefit came from the sound itself or from the soothing ritual of winding the crank, signaling to the body that rest was imminent. You tilt the box closer to your ear. The sound is richer now, vibrating faintly through the metal casing, and you feel it in your fingertips as much as you hear it. There's an intimacy in that vibration, like a cat's purr against your skin. You find yourself slowing your breath to match its lazy rhythm. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder how many people fell asleep mid-thought to this same pattern, their dreams quietly stitched together by mechanical teeth. Some of the more elaborate versions weren't satisfied with just sound. Wealthy owners could commission lullaby boxes that also released scent. Tiny compartments inside would hold dried rose petals or even drops of essential oil, the turning mechanism wafting them into the air with each rotation. One particularly eccentric countess had hers wired to a small candle heater, so that by the time the song was halfway through, her room smelled faintly of baked apples. She swore this combination of warmth, scent, and sound guaranteed her sleep without misgiving. Your own box is simpler, but you can see the appeal. There's something deeply human about wanting the night to have a soundtrack, something to lean on as the mind's sharp edges soften. And unlike the harsher tick of a clock, this sound seems to dissolve time rather than measure it. The melody changes almost imperceptibly, slipping into a minor key for a few bars before brightening again. You think of all the little moments in your life when sound has done this to you. An unexpected chord at the end of a song, the hum of a fan in summer, the muffled chatter through a train window. There's a thread running through all of them, a kind of gentle hypnosis. Victorians were fond of describing sleep as a soft descent, and you can see why. The mechanical lullaby box turns that descent into a literal spiral, the cylinder unwinding until, without fanfare, it stops. The silence is sudden, but not jarring. It's more like stepping from one room into another. You set the box back on the floor beside the bed, its brass catching the last glow of the candle stub on the table. The air feels warmer now, as though the sound had been holding the chill at bay. You lie back, head sinking into the pillow, and let the quiet settle. For a moment, you think that's the end, that the night has shown you its final trick. But then, from somewhere just beyond the edge of the bed, comes a sound that isn't mechanical at all. A low, steady hum, almost imperceptible, but growing just enough for you to notice. It's not the garland swaying. It's not the lullaby box. It's something else entirely. And in the slow, syrupy way your mind works when you're halfway to dreaming, you realize what it is. The faint whir of the fan you forgot you turned on earlier. The room has folded itself into the perfect blend of old and new, Victorian ingenuity and modern comfort, all conspiring to carry you the last few inches into sleep. You're still lying there, the room heavy with the remnants of lavender and the faint creak of old timbers settling for the night, when your Victorian hostess suddenly remembers one last idea, something she swears works every time. She beckons you toward the kitchen, her nightgown brushing the floor, and you shuffle after her in your slippers. The air grows cooler as you pass through the stone archway into a dimly lit scullery, where an old ceramic jug of milk sits in the corner like a waiting sentinel. But here's the twist. You can't just drink it. Oh no, this is the moonlight milk ritual, a curious blend of rural superstition and genteel parlor fad that Victorians whispered about in the same tone one might discuss a secret family remedy. The instructions are simple, yet oddly precise. Your cup of warm milk must be poured and held in such a way that a beam of moonlight touches its surface before you take a sip. Tonight, the moon is obliging, sliding through the high window like a patient guest invited to the party. You watch as the silvery light dances on the ripples in your cup, and your hostess nods with grave satisfaction. It pulls the restlessness out, she assures you, draws it up and away. Historically speaking, Victorians were not strangers to odd lunar beliefs. Farmers still planted crops by the moon, and some midwives swore childbirth was more likely during a full moon. But applying it to insomnia, that's where things took a whimsical turn. Mainstream physicians of the time might have rolled their eyes, but plenty of society ladies in silk dressing gowns claimed that moonlight purified the nervous system. You raise the cup to your lips, the milk warmer than expected, its surface carrying that faint metallic tang milk gets when stored in tin pails. The first sip is soothing, heavy, in the way only full cream can be. Somewhere in your mind, you remember reading about how tryptophan can induce drowsiness. But this is less about science and more about theater. The deliberate slowing of the evening, the sensation of being part of something ancient and secret. As you drink, your hostess launches into an anecdote about her cousin, a notorious night owl, who once performed the ritual on a balcony during a summer ball. He fell asleep in a chaise lounge before dessert, she says, with a mischievous smile. Missed the quadrille entirely. Of course, historians still argue whether these lunar rituals were genuinely believed to work, or if they were more of a charming social performance, a way to coax guests into relaxing without openly admitting they were simply tired. The cup drains slowly, and with each swallow, you feel your body giving in to the heaviness of the hour. There's the faint hum of the night insects outside, their rhythm merging with your own breathing. The ritual has no strict time limit, but your hostess insists you finish before the moon slips behind the clouds. She tilts her head toward the window, as though the celestial body might be listening. And perhaps the real magic is this. While you stand there in the half-lit kitchen, focusing entirely on the shimmering surface of a cup of milk, you've stopped scrolling through the day's worries in your mind. You're in the moment, held by a fragile thread of moonlight. And that, Victorian or not, is enough to make anyone sleepy. She guides you back toward your guest room, the cup now empty, your hands warm from holding it. The sheets, when you slip beneath them, feel cooler than before, as though the milk has created a soft insulation between you and the restless thoughts. You close your eyes, and somewhere far away, a church bell chimes the hour. You've barely sunk into the mattress before you hear it. This faint, muffled plink, 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 like someone gently testing piano keys in the next room, uncertain whether to begin or stop. At first, you think you're dreaming. Perhaps it's the echo of a music box you heard earlier in the evening, trapped in the folds of your mind. But then there's a soft knock at your door, and your hostess appears, candle in hand, her face half shadow, half glow. She leans in and whispers, "There's another remedy you simply must try tonight." You groan inwardly. Another Victorian experiment, and you just gotten warm. But curiosity is a tyrant you obey. You pull on your robe and follow her down a narrow hallway lined with stern-faced lithographs of ancestors glaring at you from heavy gilt frames. The floorboards creak in protest, and the air smells faintly of beeswax polish and faint coal smoke drifting from a distant hearth. The hallway opens into a small drawing room where the centerpiece dominates, a grand piano, its glossy black surface reflecting the candlelight in long, trembling streaks. The lid is closed, but you can still see the gold-lettered maker's name gleaming faintly above the keys. Beside it, an armchair is draped in lace, and a china figurine of a shepherdess watches silently from the mantel. She gestures downward to the space beneath the piano. There, someone has laid out a strange little nest. Thick quilts folded double, plump cushions in mismatched floral patterns, and even a fringed shawl for extra warmth. "This," she declares with the authority of a theater actress delivering the last line of a play, "is where you shall sleep tonight." You crouch, peering into the hollow underbelly of the instrument. It smells faintly of rosewood, dust, and decades of careful polishing. She explains that in certain households, especially those with a family member fond of evening practice, it was believed that sleeping directly under the piano allowed the resonating wood to sing you into slumber. The heavy frame and tightly strung wires above were thought to amplify deep vibrations which, much like a cat's purr, lulled the nervous system into rest. She invites you to lie down while she plays. You settle on the cushions, feeling the floorboards cool against your palms. Then she begins, not with a jaunty polka, thank heavens, but with a slow cascade of bass notes, each one blooming above you like a low cloud of sound. The vibrations travel through the wooden frame, into the floor, and into you. It's not merely hearing, it's feeling, like a private concert held inside your rib cage. Historically, Victorian parlors revolved around the piano. In the 19th century, the instrument wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was the heartbeat of middle-class leisure. Families would gather after supper to sing, play, or simply listen, and piano teachers were in constant demand. Some music historians even claim that the sound of the piano, in an otherwise quiet, lamp-lit home, could become as comforting as the smell of fresh bread or the creak of a rocking chair. But historians still argue whether this piano cocoon cure was an intentional sleep remedy or merely a charming accident. Perhaps someone, too drowsy to walk to their bed after an evening's performance, lay down beneath it and woke to find they'd slept better than they had in weeks. The Victorians, never ones to waste a good anecdote, may have turned it into a method overnight. The music continues, low arpeggios, steady and unhurried. Above you, the soundboard vibrates faintly, like the slow exhale of a sleeping giant. Your hostess slips in an occasional minor chord, which hangs in the air like the moment before rain. The space beneath the piano begins to feel smaller, warmer, more intimate, as if you've been sealed inside a wooden cocoon that hums with invisible threads. She pauses between pieces to share a story about a distant cousin who swore that a single night under the piano cured a week-long bout of insomnia, while another claimed it gave him dreams of clockwork mice dancing in moonlit attics. You chuckle softly at the absurdity, though you're starting to feel the pull of your own dreams. Outside the music, the world has quieted to a tapestry of small sounds. The occasional hiss of the coal fire in the next room, the tick of the mantel clock, the faint rustle of the curtains shifting in some invisible draft. All of it seems to sync with the piano's slow rhythm, like the whole house has tuned itself to her playing. You shift slightly on the quilts, your cheek pressing into the fabric. You realize the floor beneath is hard, but the sensation barely registers. The gentle hum in your bones has taken precedence. Even when she stops, the air holds the ghost of the music, as though the last note refuses to leave. The sudden stillness is less a silence and more a lingering embrace. In the quiet, you think of modern sleep apps with their curated soundscapes, gentle pianos overlaid with rain, waves, or crackling fires. Maybe, you muse, they're just the digital great-grandchildren of moments like this. The unhurried playing, the warm, dim room, the strange comfort of being cradled by a structure built for music. As your eyelids grow heavy, you feel a slow drift, like a boat slipping from its moorings into dark, still water. The last thing you sense is the faint vibration in the wood above you, soft, steady, and unreasonably kind. You're woken by the faint scent of something herbal, mint, perhaps, or lemon balm, hovering at the edge of your senses. It weaves into your half-dreams until your eyes blink open, heavy-lidded, and reluctant. You're no longer beneath the piano. Sometime in the small hours, someone must have helped you to a bed, though you can't remember the journey. The room is dim, lit by a lone candle whose flame sways like a lazy dancer in a draft. Your hostess is back, though this time she's dressed in a quilted dressing gown of faded burgundy, her hair tucked under a lace nightcap. She's holding a shallow porcelain bowl filled with a steaming greenish infusion. Beside her, on a small walnut table, sits a peculiar contraption, a tall glass cylinder with a brass funnel at the top, and from it emerges a long, flexible tube ending in a delicate silver mouthpiece. She announces, with the solemnity of a priestess unveiling a sacred relic, "This is your herbal vapor cure." You raise an eyebrow, the image of a Victorian-era hookah floating unbidden into your mind. She chuckles, anticipating your skepticism, and explains that in the mid to late 19th century, some households, especially those on the cutting edge of fashionable wellness, believed that inhaling warm vapors infused with herbs could soothe restless nerves, open congested sinuses, and, most importantly, invite sleep. The concoction inside the bowl is a blend of dried peppermint leaves, chamomile flowers, and crushed valerian root. She stirs it gently with a wooden spoon, releasing small puffs of scented steam that curl toward you like lazy smoke signals. The air feels instantly thicker, richer, almost drinkable. She gestures for you to sit, then places the silver mouthpiece to your lips. The first inhalation is startling. It's warm, wetter than ordinary breath, and it tastes like an overgrown garden after a rainstorm. You can pick out the bright sharpness of mint, the soft apple honey note of chamomile, and a faint, earthy bitterness from the valerian. She tells you that valerian root was a common Victorian sedative, prescribed for everything from insomnia to nervous afflictions. In women, historians still argue whether its effects were truly medicinal or largely placebo, though, judging by the deep sigh it pulls from you, you're leaning toward the former. As the vapors wrap around your senses, you feel your muscles unknot. The sound of the night seems to dull. The ticking clock softens. The wind outside feels far away, and even the candle's small hiss becomes a slow, soothing metronome. She encourages you to close your eyes and keep inhaling, assuring you that many a sleepless Victorian swore by this ritual. She tells a story of a neighbor, a banker with permanent under-eye shadows, who would stagger home from long hours at the counting house, collapse into a chair, and have his wife prepare an herbal vapor. Within 15 minutes, his head would nod forward like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Another tale involves a traveling stage actress who carried her own miniature vaporizer, using it in drafty inns to fight off the ache of cold nights and the excitement of applause still ringing in her ears. The warmth of the vapor seems to expand beyond your lungs, radiating into your chest and down your arms. You imagine it filling you like a soft light, pooling in your hands, sliding down your spine. There's a moment when you almost forget you're breathing at all, when inhalation and exhalation blur into one continuous velvety cycle. Your hostess sets down the mouthpiece and moves the apparatus closer to the bed, letting the steam drift into the room. Soon the air is a foggy cocoon, scented and strangely heavy, like the inside of a greenhouse just after dawn. You lie back, feeling the fabric of the pillow catch faintly against your hair, and you watch the ceiling's faint shadows dissolve in the rising mist. She hums as she tends to the bowl, an absent-minded tune without words. You catch fragments of it and think it might be a lullaby, though one you've never heard before. It mingles with the rhythmic burble of the infusion and the gentle hiss as a drop of condensed steam hits the hot brass funnel. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you compare this scene to modern aromatherapy diffusers, the kind you plug into a wall and fill with lavender oil. Perhaps the Victorians, without microchips or LEDs, were simply inventing the analog version, one puff of steam at a time. It's charming to think that across more than a century, the same human need persists, to wrap ourselves in scent and warmth until the waking world loses its grip. The vapor grows thicker, a gauzy curtain between you and the candle. Your eyes feel grainy, your limbs pleasantly leaden. You stretch one foot under the quilt and find the cool patch, a small shock that makes you shift, then sink deeper into stillness. As you hover on the edge of sleep, the room becomes a world of softened edges, sound dulled, light muted, air fragrant and forgiving. The brass funnel gurgles one last time, like a sigh of satisfaction, and you know the infusion is spent. Your hostess tiptoes toward the door, pausing only to glance back and smile, her face blurred by the mist. Then she's gone, and the night closes in, tender and inevitable. You're not sure what wakes you this time, perhaps the faint shuffle of fabric or the almost comical squeak of a wheel in desperate need of oil. The candle from earlier has burned low, its wax pooled and hardened in a lopsided puddle on the table. In its place stands a tall figure draped in a striped dressing gown, wheeling toward you what can only be described as a wooden cage on spindly legs. Inside the cage, several small compartments are stacked like drawers, each lined with some mysterious material that gleams faintly in the dim light. Your hostess, because of course it's her, grins with a mix of pride and mischief. "You've had the vapors," she says, "but tonight we try the gentle electric lullaby." The phrase sounds both reassuring and ominous. You sit up a little, eyeing the contraption as though it might sprout fangs. She kneels beside it, unlocking the cage door, revealing an assortment of coiled copper wires, polished brass plates, and, most alarmingly, 2 dampened cloth pads attached to black cords. This, she explains, is a Victorian nerve soother, one of many quackish but oddly popular electrotherapy devices from the late 1800s. The idea, a mild electrical current run through certain parts of the body, could reset the nervous system, lulling the sufferer into tranquility and, hopefully, sleep. Historians still argue whether these devices were harmless gimmicks or dangerous pseudoscience, though newspaper ads of the time swore they were miracles in polished oak. She assures you it's safe, the gentlest tickle, nothing more, and invites you to place your hands on the damp pads. The moisture, she says, helps conduct the current. You hesitate, imagining the jolt of static when touching a doorknob after shuffling across carpet. But curiosity wins. The first flicker of sensation is indeed mild, a soft tingling, almost like the fizz of champagne against your palms. Then it deepens into a rhythmic pulse, a steady hum that travels up your wrists and seems to reverberate in your elbows. It's not painful, more like your muscles are being persuaded to exhale. She tells you that such machines were often marketed toward overworked businessmen and delicate ladies, plagued by hysteria, insomnia, or neurasthenia, a catch-all diagnosis for fatigue, anxiety, and the vague sense of being unwell in the modern age. One pamphlet claimed the currents harmonize the electric aura of the body, which sounds suspiciously like something you'd hear at a wellness retreat today. You smirk at the thought, earning a playful swat on the shoulder. To demonstrate its versatility, she adjusts a brass dial, and the hum changes pitch. The sensation shifts, less fizz now, more a warm rolling wave that moves from your fingers toward your shoulders. It's oddly hypnotic. You focus on the repetition, the way each pulse feels identical to the last, a perfect little metronome for the body. Your breathing falls into sync without effort. She shares a story about a widowed dressmaker who kept one of these machines in her back room. Each night, after hours of stitching by lamplight, she'd hook herself up to the pads, humming quietly as the current eased the ache in her arms. Slept like a lamb, she supposedly told the neighbors, and dreamt only of clouds. Another tale involves a traveling salesman who swore the machine cured his insomnia, only to later admit he kept falling asleep mid-pitch to clients. The room is still except for the faint buzz of the device, the ticking of the clock, and your own slow breaths. The candlelight flickers across the brass fittings, giving them the illusion of movement, as if the machine itself is breathing with you. You imagine the Victorians huddled in parlors, half believing in science, half enchanted by the spectacle of it all, the shine of copper, the mystery of invisible forces made tangible. She dials it down again, the pulses softening until they're little more than a ghost against your skin. The stillness afterward is startling, like stepping from a crowded room into fresh night air. Your fingers feel oddly light, your shoulders loose, and you're surprised by how much you miss the hum the moment it stops. She pats your hand, unhooks the cords, and drapes the damp pads neatly back into their compartment. The machine, she says, is an acquired taste, too strange for some, yet indispensable for others. For you, it's left a kind of echo in your bones, a subtle vibration you can almost still hear if you focus. As she wheels the contraption away, you lie back down, the quilt pulling warmly over your chest. The clock ticks on, steady as the earlier current, and your eyelids sink heavier with each beat. Somewhere between thought and dream, you wonder if it's the electricity, the ritual, or simply the absurd charm of the thing that's working. But by the time you try to answer yourself, the question is already gone, dissolved into the night. The sound that drifts into your dreams this time is a long, hollow slosh, like someone gently stirring a bucket of water in the dark. You blink yourself awake to find your hostess crouched near the hearth, where an enamel basin steams faintly in the dim glow. The scent is sharp, herbal, and faintly medicinal. Peppermint, maybe, with something woodier underneath. She notices you stirring and gestures toward the foot of the bed. "Tonight," she says with a conspiratorial smile, "we soothe you from the toes up." You shift, pushing back the quilt to reveal your bare feet, and she slides the basin closer. The steam rolls upward, wrapping your ankles in warmth even before you've touched the water. It turns out to be what she calls a Victorian mustard foot bath, a curious cure-all beloved by insomniacs and the perpetually chilled. Into the hot water, she's stirred mustard powder, a few crushed peppermint leaves, and, she admits this with a wink, a dash of brandy for bravery. The theory, she explains, is that mustard stimulates circulation, drawing blood away from the head and down to the extremities, leaving the mind calmer and ready for sleep. Historians still argue whether it's genuine medicine or simply an elaborate excuse to fuss over your feet. You dip your toes in, and the heat is immediate, like stepping into a pocket of summer. The mustard adds a faint, prickling warmth, as though 100 tiny bubbles are fizzing just beneath your skin. The peppermint cuts through the heaviness of the steam. Each breath is bright and sharp as a mouthful of snow. She tells you that in some Victorian households, a mustard foot bath was a nightly ritual for children who couldn't settle. One mother supposedly swore it cured her son's habit of waking at 3 a.m. to read penny dreadfuls by candlelight. Another claimed it worked so well on her husband that he began falling asleep in the chair before she'd finished telling him about her day, which, she admits, might have been the real goal. The basin's heat seeps upward into your calves, loosening muscles you didn't realize were tense. The sensation is both grounding and oddly hypnotic. Your body wants to stay perfectly still so it can absorb every bit of that warmth. The room's quiet magnifies the little sounds, the faint hiss of the steam, the occasional creak of the basin settling on the floorboards, your own slow breathing. She dips a small cloth into the water and wrings it out until it drips in rhythmic taps onto the wood. Then she presses it to the tops of your feet, letting the heat and herbs cling there a moment longer. You close your eyes, and in the darkness, you can imagine being in some mountain cabin with snow piled high outside, the world narrowed to nothing but this warmth. In true Victorian fashion, she can't resist adding a twist. While your feet soak, she places a cool lavender compress across your forehead. The contrast, heat below, chill above, is startling at first, then delicious, like stepping between sun and shade on a summer afternoon. She calls it balancing the humors, though she's quick to admit the phrase has more poetry than science. The combination of sensations starts to pull your thoughts into slow, lazy spirals. Your mind drifts between the sting of mustard, the crisp scent of peppermint, and the drowsy lull of lavender. She talks in a low voice about seaside towns where such baths were offered in small rooms lit only by oil lamps, the steam curling up like smoke against dark-paneled walls. By the time she lifts the basin away, your feet feel not just warm, but deeply, luxuriously heavy, as though they've been anchored to the bed. She pats them dry with a thick towel, tucking the quilt back over you so the heat stays trapped. The lavender cloth stays on your forehead a little longer, coolness fading gradually until it matches the rest of your skin. You yawn without meaning to, and she smiles in quiet triumph. The Victorians didn't always know why things worked, she says, but sometimes they stumbled on something worth keeping. You have just enough energy left to murmur agreement before your head tilts to the side, the lavender slipping off into the pillow. Somewhere beyond the edge of waking, you imagine mustard fields glowing yellow in the sun, peppermint leaves rustling in a soft breeze, and a lavender horizon stretching endlessly ahead. Then those images fade, replaced by the warm dark of the room, the quilt's weight, and the slow rhythm of your own breath. Tonight, the air in your borrowed Victorian bedroom is already thick with sweetness. Before you've even opened your eyes fully, it's not the subtle floral drift of lavender or rose you've grown used to. This is denser, richer, like someone has dissolved an entire jar of honey into the atmosphere. Your hostess is back, hovering near the side table with a curious contraption that looks like a teapot had an unlikely marriage with a kettle drum. A long spout curves over a glass cup that she positions just inches from your face. Inhale, she says softly, as though you might spook like a wild animal. The steam curls up into your nostrils, warm and thick, carrying with it a scent that's both comforting and almost cloying. Orange blossom water, she explains, infused with chamomile and a single vanilla bean. In Victorian circles, this was called a sleep inhalation, a cousin to the medicinal vapors used for colds. But here, the aim is to lull the brain into the same drowsy stupor one might feel after an afternoon picnic in the sun. Historians still argue whether it was the botanicals doing the work or simply the hypnotic act of slow, deliberate breathing. You close your eyes and pull the fragrant steam deeper, feeling it slide down the back of your throat. The warmth lingers in your chest, loosening the knot that always seems to sit there after too many restless nights. The glass cup is warm against your chin, and somewhere in the background you catch the faint, steady tick of the mantel clock, a reminder that time is still moving even as your body seems to slow. She tells you stories of Victorian ladies who swore by such inhalations before bed. One used to lean over her boiling pot of chamomile and orange peel every night, while her maid read her poetry in a near whisper. Another insisted on a midnight brew, so potent the servants had to open the windows afterward to let the bees out. A likely exaggeration, but you picture it anyway. The tiny golden insects drifting through moonlight toward the garden. Your hostess swaps the cup for another, slightly cooler one, explaining that the temperature change keeps you from drifting off too quickly and missing the full effect. The second cup carries a sharper edge, peppermint and lemon balm, which jolts your senses just enough to notice how heavy your limbs have grown. You're aware of your feet pressed into the mattress, your hands resting in your lap, your shoulders sinking further toward the pillow with each exhale. Some Victorians, she says, believed alternating warm and cool vapor inhalations trained the nervous system, a sort of bedtime gymnastics for the brain. She admits it might just be the era's way of making an indulgent spa treatment sound like hard science. The scents begin to mingle in your head. Vanilla with peppermint, orange blossom with lemon balm, until you can't tell one from the other. They weave together like threads in a blanket you can't see but can feel wrapping around your mind. You start to hear less of her words and more of the pauses between them, the little silences where the steam sighs into the air. Then comes the final step. She dips a soft cloth into what's left of the warm infusion and lays it gently over your face. The heat is like a veil shutting out the lamplight, the clock, and even her presence. In the darkness, the scents are sharper and yet somehow more distant, as though they're blooming from somewhere inside your own thoughts. You feel your breath slowing, each inhale a careful gathering of fragrance, each exhale a quiet surrender to the mattress beneath you. The quilt's weight presses along your legs, anchoring you in place. Somewhere in the haze, you realize you haven't opened your eyes in minutes, and you have no wish to. The steam cools gradually, the cloth growing heavier with it, until the warmth fades into the natural temperature of the room. She removes it with the same care you might use to lift a sleeping cat, and for a moment you wonder if she's gone. Then the faint sound of water being poured into the basin reassures you she's still here, tidying the evidence of her work. Your last conscious thought before slipping under is that the Victorians, for all their bizarre medical ideas, might have understood one universal truth. If you give a restless soul warmth, fragrance, and the excuse to do nothing but breathe, sleep will eventually come. You wake, not from sleep, but from that strange middle place where time has no clear edge, to the sound of soft swishing just beyond the foot of the bed. At first, you think it might be a servant sweeping the hallway, but then you see her, your ever-dedicated hostess, walking slowly back and forth with a shallow, wide-brimmed dish in her hands. The dish glints faintly in the lamplight. Inside, layers of pale green seaweed are draped like damp ribbons, the edges curling and twitching in the cool evening air. You catch the briny scent almost immediately, that deep ocean tang that reminds you of walking along a pier at low tide. It's not unpleasant, just unexpected here in the heart of a stuffy Victorian townhouse. She sets the dish down on a stand beside your bed and explains, as though this were perfectly reasonable bedtime behavior, that the sea's breath has curative powers. In certain coastal towns, Victorians kept bowls of wet seaweed near the bed to release a gentle vapor overnight. It was believed this oceanic essence could clear the lungs, calm the nerves, and, most importantly, coax the mind into slow rhythmic waves of thought until sleep followed naturally. Historians still argue whether anyone actually measured these effects, or if the whole ritual was more about nostalgia for summer holidays on the coast. You lean closer, curious. The strands glisten as though freshly plucked from the shore, still slick with salt water. She stirs them with a silver spoon, releasing another wave of scent. Slightly metallic now, almost mineral, like the taste of a sea breeze on your lips. You imagine Victorian families hauling crates of seaweed inland, carefully keeping it damp during the train ride so it would breathe properly in the bedroom that night. The hostess recalls an eccentric baronet who insisted his seaweed bowls be replaced every 3 days, no matter the expense. "It loses its spirit," he'd say gravely, "and a lifeless sea cannot sing one to sleep." You picture him lying stiffly in his massive 4-post bed, waiting for the faintest lullaby from a bowl of kelp. The longer you sit with it, the more your senses adapt. The sharpness fades, replaced by a soft, earthy undertone that feels strangely grounding. It's like your lungs are stretching a little more with each inhale, expanding in time with an invisible tide. You start to notice your own body sinking to that rhythm, the slight rise of your chest, the gentle fall over and over. She dims the lamp until the room is caught between shadow and glow. The seaweed, in that light, takes on an almost magical hue, the greens deepening into something richer, like moss at the bottom of a shaded pool. You swear you can hear a faint crackle from the bowl, as though it's remembering the surf that once carried it. In the Victorian imagination, the ocean was both mystery and medicine. The salt air was praised in medical journals as a cure for urban ailments and sleeplessness, especially among those who could not afford long stays at a seaside sanatorium. For the wealthy, though, bringing the ocean indoors became another display of both health awareness and eccentric taste. You close your eyes and let the smell paint pictures behind your eyelids. Endless gray waves under a moonlit sky, the soft slap of water against wooden pilings, the creak of ropes on a dock. Somewhere in that dreamlike imagery, your thoughts begin to slow, like they're being pulled gently back to shore after drifting too far. She places a folded cloth under the bowl, muting the faint clink of ceramic against wood. It's such a small, considerate sound, but it makes you feel oddly cared for, as if the whole ritual is as much about the act of tending as it is about the seaweed itself. When she finally slips out, the room is quiet except for the faint whisper of the kelp's damp edges settling against one another. You breathe in, and for the first time tonight, the thought of sleep feels like the tide. It's coming, inevitable, and all you have to do is let it take you. You're halfway between amusement and surrender when the next curiosity makes its entrance. Not from the hostess this time, but from a young maid, clutching a leather-bound notebook and an inkwell so small it looks like it might have been stolen from a dollhouse. She sets them gently on the bedside table, eyes flicking toward the seaweed bowl, as if wondering whether it's still breathing. Without ceremony, she places a quill in your hand. The feather is stiff but silky, and the faint scent of ink, sharp, metallic, rises immediately. She explains, in the clipped tone of someone repeating instructions learned by rote, that this is your nightly mind-emptying exercise. In Victorian parlors, it was common to believe that an overactive brain could be bled of its excess thoughts through ink. The goal: spill every lingering worry, memory, or odd scrap of imagination onto the page until there's simply nothing left to keep you awake. You imagine a prim Victorian gentleman hunched over his desk at 11:47 p.m., candlelight trembling across his knuckles, furiously scribbling about unpaid debts, a neighbor's strange hat, or the haunting suspicion that the cat resents him. Historians still argue whether this was an early form of self-therapy or just another excuse for stationery enthusiasts to show off their monogrammed paper. The maid sets the candle lower, throwing a warm circle over the blank page. Your first words are hesitant, like stepping onto a frozen pond. The quill scratches softly, an oddly satisfying sound, equal parts delicate and deliberate. Before long, the act becomes hypnotic. Dip, tap, glide, lift. You write about the room, about the damp scent of the seaweed, about how the clock's tick seems slower than it did an hour ago. Every so often, you glance toward the edge of the paper and realize the candle wax is starting to pool unevenly, forming strange shapes that resemble tiny maps. The Victorians might have read them like tea leaves, searching for omens about tomorrow's mood. You simply notice how the pools catch the light, trembling with each draft from the window. The maid tells you, almost conspiratorially, about a woman she once served who would write entire fictional letters to herself. One night, she'd pen a note from her future self, reassuring that tomorrow's worries would resolve. Another night, she'd write as if she were an entirely different person, an explorer, a governess, even the queen, then seal the page in an envelope and hide it in the lining of her pillow. It wasn't about truth. It was about emptying the mind of any shape of thought, even imaginary ones. Some Victorian physicians actually recommended that insomniacs destroy their nightly writing the moment it was complete, burning it to ensure that none of the day's mental clutter lingered in physical form. The maid produces a small brass tray and a single match. She gestures toward the page you've just filled, and you realize she expects you to offer it up to the flame. You hesitate. There's something quietly precious about the words you've just written, however trivial. But you pass it over. The paper curls instantly, edges glowing like embers under a thin layer of ash. The smoke is faint but sweet, mingling with the briny air from the seaweed and creating a strangely comforting perfume. You watch the ashes collapse into themselves, an oddly satisfying punctuation to the act. The room feels lighter. Your shoulders sink a little deeper into the mattress. You understand now why this ritual might have been more than just quaint eccentricity. There's a pleasure in knowing you've set your thoughts down, given them shape, and then let them vanish. Outside, a gentle drizzle has begun, tapping against the window in a slow, even rhythm. You consider picking up the quill again just to describe the sound, but the warmth of the blanket, the flicker of the candle, and the soft mingling scents make it almost too much effort. You let the notebook remain closed, and for the first time, the blankness on the page feels like an invitation rather than a challenge. The maid quietly removes the tray of ashes and the inkwell, her footsteps barely audible. She glances back once, as if making sure you're not about to leap up and start another midnight chapter. But you stay still. Your mind is as quiet as the room itself. Somewhere deep in that stillness, you feel the edges of sleep pressing closer, as if your thoughts have finally tired themselves out and agreed to let you go. The next hour is not about ink or herbs or any potion at all. It's about light, or rather, the lack of it. Your hostess insists that your sleeplessness is probably caused by the moon, which, she says with an air of complete authority, beams thoughts straight into the mind. You can't tell if she's quoting a doctor or a particularly poetic milkman. She leads you to the far side of the room, where a tall carved wooden contraption stands in the corner. At first, it looks like an unused harp draped with velvet, but as she pulls the cloth away, you realize it's a lunar shield. This Victorian invention is essentially a tall panel covered in thick, deep blue fabric meant to block any stray moonlight from touching the sleeper's skin. The Victorians were surprisingly serious about lunar influences. Some believed moonbeams could bleach hair, disturb dreams, or even cause madness if they touched you at the wrong phase. Historians still argue whether this fear was superstition or an overextension of early medical theories about light affecting the brain. The shield is positioned between your bed and the large sash window. The wood smells faintly of beeswax, and the fabric carries the dusty scent of something that has hung untouched for seasons. When she moves it into place, the moonlight that had been washing across your pillow is suddenly cut off, replaced by a velvety darkness. It's like stepping from a quiet street into a theater just before the curtain rises. As your eyes adjust, you realize the shadows have grown richer, almost layered. The edges of furniture soften, and even the ticking clock seems slower. You shift under the blankets and feel the subtle difference in temperature. Cooler now that the pale lunar glow is gone. Your hostess explains, almost in a whisper, that she will stay nearby to monitor your lunar exposure. You can't help but imagine her taking moon readings with some brass and glass contraption in the hallway. There's a quirky detail, she adds. Some households went as far as sewing tiny caps for their pets to prevent moon-induced mischief. You picture a terrier in a snug nightcap, glaring indignantly at the full moon, and you stifle a laugh. The idea is so absurd that it slips into your imagination like a lullaby. Small, ridiculous comforts are the sort that stick. You lie there, half amused, half intrigued, wondering if the darkness will really make a difference. It does feel more enclosed, almost cocoon-like. The kind of space where thoughts don't so much wander as they fold themselves neatly away. The shield blocks not only light, but the faint silver reflections that had been dancing on the walls. Without them, the room feels grounded, like you've been pulled slightly deeper into the earth. Your hostess tells you about a patient she once helped, an insomniac who claimed he could hear the moon. It wasn't a sound exactly, but a pressure that grew stronger the fuller the moon became. With the shield in place, he finally slept through the night. You find yourself wondering if you'll be as lucky. The absence of moonlight changes how you hear the rain outside. Before, it seemed to glitter against the glass. Now, it's just a soft, steady patter. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaks, and then all is still again. The darkness is dense, like velvet that muffles not just light, but stray thoughts. You test closing your eyes, and it's almost the same as leaving them open. The only difference is the faint warmth of your eyelids. You imagine the Victorians dressed in elaborate nightwear, carefully pulling these shields into place each evening, convinced they were sealing themselves off from celestial interference. Maybe, in a way, they were right. Not about the moon sending thoughts, but about the value of creating a boundary, a space designed entirely for rest. After a while, you forget the shield is even there. The bed feels heavier, the pillow more supportive. The darkness seems to pool gently in the hollows of the room, holding you in a kind of stillness that words can't quite reach. And though you know the moon is still outside, bright and silver, it feels as distant as the tide it pulls across unseen shores. The final curiosity of tonight's long parade arrives not in a bottle, not wrapped in cloth, but folded neatly in a lacquered wooden box the size of a shoebox. Your hostess sets it on your lap with the care usually reserved for fine china. The lid slides open to reveal a bundle of paper-thin sheets. Parchment, really, each coated in a faint shimmer that catches the lamplight. She calls them dream envelopes, a name that sounds more like a forgotten fairy tale than a Victorian insomnia remedy. In truth, they're sheets of paper impregnated with dried lavender powder, powdered camphor, and a whisper of beeswax, pressed between warm iron plates until the scents fuse into the fibers. You're meant to write your worries or your to-do list on one of these sheets before bed. Fold it 3 times and tuck it under your pillow. The idea? You've given your anxieties a home for the night, so your mind is free to sleep. Historians still argue whether this was rooted in genuine psychology or simply a ritualized placebo. But you can't deny the tactile comfort of the process. The Victorians loved rituals, elaborate sequences that made ordinary moments feel ceremonial. And this one has all the trimmings, delicate stationery, fragrant ingredients, and the satisfying final fold. She offers you a fountain pen, the kind with a nib so fine you suspect it could slice a hair in half. The ink smells faintly metallic, and when you dip it, a bubble rises from the nib like a tiny sigh. You rest the sheet on your knee, the camphor scent curling upward in soft waves. You start to write, not a confession, not exactly, but the loose ends that have been rattling in your head like a drawer that won't quite close. Some Victorians would go further, sealing the folded paper with a dab of wax and a personal crest stamp, as if the worries themselves needed to be kept private from prying eyes. Your hostess mentions a baroness who reportedly burned the envelopes at dawn to ensure her troubles never returned. The baroness swore it worked every time, though one suspects it was more about the satisfaction of watching problems turn to smoke. You fold your sheet slowly, creasing it with your thumb. The paper is warm from your hand, and the scent seems to bloom each time you press it. You slip it beneath your pillow, feeling oddly lighter, as though some small portion of your mind has been filed away for later retrieval. The bed accepts you with a sigh of springs, and you notice how different the air smells now, herbal, slightly sweet, with a cooling edge from the camphor. The lamplight fades as your hostess turns the flame down to a trembling ember. You're left in the half-light, aware of the pillow's weight pressing your envelope gently against the mattress. There's a strange security in knowing your thoughts are captured somewhere close, but not in your head. The room feels tidier without them floating around. You imagine countless Victorians performing the same ritual, their bedrooms full of hidden folded papers like little time capsules of their private midnights. As the quiet deepens, you catch yourself listening for the rustle of the paper as if it might shift on its own, rearranging your dreams into something more orderly. Maybe it will, or maybe, like so many of tonight's peculiar remedies, the magic is in the gesture, not the outcome. But your eyelids are heavier now, and that's more than enough proof for this moment. You wake, or perhaps you never truly slept, in a room that feels cooler than before, the kind of cool that has no single source, as though the air itself has traveled from far away. It carries with it a whisper of salt, a mineral tang that pricks at the edges of your senses. No tea tonight, no warm broth. Instead, your hostess appears at the doorway with a deliberate, almost ceremonial posture, both hands cupping a porcelain bowl. When she sets it down on the small table beside you, the first thing you notice is its contents. A mound of pale, ribbon-like strips, curled and tangled as though they'd been pulled from a mermaid's comb. They glisten faintly in the candlelight, edges stiff, yet translucent. She does not speak immediately, letting you stare, as if she's accustomed to guests needing a moment before daring to touch. "These," she says softly, "are moon-dried kelp strips." The phrase rolls in your mind like a slow wave. In the Victorian era, the ocean was a place of mystery for many city dwellers. Londoners who never left the soot and cobblestone might only glimpse the sea in paintings, newspapers, or carefully written travel diaries. And yet, the sea was imagined to be a storehouse of health, bracing air for weak lungs, sea bathing for pale complexions, salt water tonics for fragile nerves. Kelp, in particular, held a certain magic in the Victorian mind. It was a plant that moved constantly, swaying with tides, absorbing sunlight and salt in equal measure. Some doctors claimed the scent of dried kelp alone could calm the restless and quiet and overworked mind. Others believed its iodine-rich vapor acted almost like a sedative. Historians still argue whether this fascination was genuine coastal folk wisdom carried inland, or simply a fashionable indulgence for the urban wealthy who wanted to taste a hint of the sea without enduring a full journey to it. Your hostess begins the ritual. She selects a strip of kelp, smooth, leathery, faintly cool to the touch, and drapes it across the rim of a tall glass jar filled with steaming water. The heat begins to coax something out of the plant. A briny aroma, lightly metallic, like walking along a harbor pier just after rain. Slowly, the ribbons darken, curling more tightly, releasing their scent into the air. As the steam rises, the room seems to change shape. Corners soften, shadows blur. The air feels denser, as though each breath carries a subtle weight. She explains that some Victorians paired this with another ocean-inspired trick, placing a shallow dish of seawater beneath the bed. The belief was poetic, if not scientific, that the water would anchor your dreams, keeping them calm, just as a ship's anchor keeps it steady in the current. You can picture it, a polished townhouse bedroom, its walls papered in muted florals, the lady of the house leaning down in her nightgown to slide a porcelain bowl carefully beneath the bed frame, the scent of salt, faint in the stillness. Perhaps she would climb into bed, draw the curtains, and imagine herself in a cabin on a quiet ship, waves rocking gently beneath her. Your hostess hands you one of the softened kelp strips. It's pliable now, warm from the steam, with a surface like suede that clings faintly to your fingertips. You mirror her action, laying it over your own jar. Steam curls through the fronds, carrying the scent upward. The hiss of hot water meeting damp plant matter is barely audible, but somehow it becomes the loudest thing in the room. She tells you stories of Victorian sleepers who swore by the kelp method. Some claimed they dreamed only of the sea, of moonlight over glassy bays, of lighthouses blinking in the distance, of long voyages where the horizon stayed just out of reach. Others said the scent didn't so much summon dreams as loosen the knots in their thoughts, allowing them to sink more easily into rest. One eccentric gentleman kept a detailed dream journal after each kelp night. One of his shortest entries simply read, "Boat made of bread." Very peaceful. You can't decide whether to find that silly or oddly beautiful. You lean back into the pillows, letting the salt-sweet air weave its way into your breathing. It's strange. This is not the sharp, nose-pinching smell of seaweed rotting on a beach. It's gentler, carrying just enough mineral tang to feel alive. It's almost a cousin to modern aromatherapy, though far more theatrical. Today, we buy lavender oil in neat little bottles. The Victorians boiled cabbage leaves or, in this case, smuggled damp ribbons of seaweed from the coast and staged an entire performance before bed. Outside, a breeze rattles the shutters. For a moment, you imagine the sound is rigging on a ship's mast, swaying as the vessel drifts toward some unknown harbor. Your pulse slows to match an invisible rhythm, perhaps the tide, perhaps just the steadying effect of this small ritual. Your hostess extinguishes the nearest candle, dimming the room to just one flame across the space. The shadows deepen, the steam catches the light, and you can almost see the outline of waves rolling in and out. The kelp hangs limp over the jar now, spent of most of its fragrance, but still holding a whisper of the sea. As you close your eyes, the edges of the bed seem to blur into a shoreline. The mattress becomes sand warmed by the day, the blanket a shifting tide pulling gently at your limbs. You realize you've been breathing in time with something larger than yourself, something old and patient. Whether it's the iodine, the scent memory, or simple suggestion, you feel heavier, calmer, as though you might drift for hours without stirring. You hear her voice, low and steady. The sea never sleeps, but it will watch over you. And with that, the last candle is snuffed, and the room settles into a darkness that feels not empty, but deep. You awake to a thin thread of morning light slicing across the room, but before your eyes can adjust, you're distracted by a peculiar sound. It's not the usual creak of floorboards or the soft sigh of distant wind. No, this is a sharp, crisp crackle, like someone tearing paper very slowly. Your hostess stands at the far side of the room, holding a shallow brass pan over a low flame. Inside the pan, clusters of pale crystals glint in the heat. They're irregular, some the size of lentils, others no bigger than coarse sand. She stirs them with a wooden spoon, and each turn releases a faint hiss. "These are sugar crystals," she says, as though that should be obvious. But not the refined, white, sweet sort you'd sprinkle on your morning toast. These have a subtle amber tone, almost translucent, as though they've been dipped in candlelight. She explains that in the late Victorian era, some households used roasted sugar vapors as a sleep aid. You blink, imagining an insomniac Londoner in 1888, pacing his sitting room in a threadbare robe, deciding the solution lies in heating sugar until it gives off an invisible perfume. Historians still argue whether this began as a folk practice passed down from Caribbean sugar workers, or if it was simply one of many desperate home experiments in an age that loved both novelty and self-treatment. The logic, according to her, was charmingly simple. Roasted sugar produces a faintly caramelized aroma that, so they believed, could lull the nervous system into a more peaceful state. It was thought to trigger gentle associations of childhood, kitchens, and comfort. A few manuals even recommended adding crushed vanilla pods or cinnamon bark to the pan for a more potent charm upon the restless. She stirs again, and this time the smell reaches you. A soft, toasted sweetness, not cloying, but warm and round. It's the kind of scent that sits halfway between dessert and memory. It reminds you of carnival candy stalls, of the thin crust on creme brulee, of walking past a bakery at dawn when the ovens have just been opened. She tells you of one eccentric society lady who swore by sugar nights. Every evening at precisely 10, she'd set a pan of sugar over a flame, sit in a low armchair with her skirts fanned around her, and watch until the grains turned golden. Her friends laughed at her, but she insisted it was the only thing that kept her from wandering the house until dawn. In her will, she even left instructions for a sugar pan to be placed in her coffin should the afterlife be too lively. You can't help but smile, picturing that scene, the stubbornness of ritual, the belief that the faintest whiff of caramel could tame the restlessness of a mind wound too tight. Your hostess moves the pan closer to you, letting the steam and aroma envelop your space. It's almost hypnotic. Each inhale is slow, deep, and oddly grounding. You realize that unlike many earlier Victorian cures, mustard plasters, icy foot baths, vinegar compresses, this one is pleasant from the start. There's no sting, no shock, just warmth, sweetness, and the faint crackle of crystals shifting in the pan. She explains that some families would place the pan at the foot of the bed, letting the scent drift upward as the sugar cooled. The faint glow of embers beneath the pan also served as a kind of nightlight, flickering shadows across the wallpaper. Children, in particular, were said to sleep better under the watch of this soft, golden scent. Whether it was the chemistry of caramelization or just the comfort of a sensory anchor, no one could prove. But the stories persisted. You imagine yourself in a small lamp-lit bedroom, the scent of sugar curling around the blankets, the hiss of cooling crystals marking the passage into deeper stillness. There's something intimate about it, this act of transforming a kitchen staple into a whispered lullaby for the senses. The crackle grows quieter as she removes the pan from the flame. The sugar now sits in soft clusters, some edges browned, some still pale. She places it on the table beside you, and the heat radiates faintly against your arm. You lean toward it, inhaling once more. The air is richer now, layered, sweetness at the top, warmth in the middle, a faint hint of smoke at the bottom. For a long moment, you simply sit in the shared silence, the pan between you like a campfire. You feel the scent settling in your chest, smoothing the edges of thought. Perhaps there's no true sedative here, just a quiet signal to your body. It is time to rest. Outside, a carriage clatters past on the cobblestones, but it barely disturbs you. The sound seems distant, as though you're hearing it from inside a dream you've already entered. The pan cools further, the sugar scent softens, and your eyelids lower without resistance. Your hostess doesn't speak again. She simply takes the pan once more, setting it carefully on the hearth, where the last of its warmth fades into the room like an unhurried sigh. The next evening finds you in yet another drawing room, this one dimmer, with heavy drapes pulled so tightly that even the moon seems reluctant to intrude. The air here carries a faint, dry tang, like paper left too long in the sun. Your host, a tall, angular gentleman in a waistcoat that looks older than his bones, stands by a small writing desk. On it rests a curious contraption, a slender glass cylinder suspended over a shallow porcelain basin. He gestures you closer, and you see that the cylinder is filled with what appears to be crushed lavender flowers, dried lemon peel, and most peculiarly, thin curls of dried willow bark. He explains, quietly as if imparting a trade secret, that this is his own version of a Victorian soporific inhaler. The principle, he says, was widely known in the mid to late 1800s, though every apothecary had their own blend. The idea was to heat certain fragrant botanicals until they released a vapor believed to calm the nerves and draw the mind toward sleep. Historians still argue whether these devices were an adaptation of older herbal smoking customs or a purely Victorian invention, inspired by the growing popularity of medical inhalers for respiratory ailments. The gentleman strikes a match and lights a small oil lamp beneath the basin. The gentle heat begins to warm the herbs in the glass tube, and soon faint wisps of scented vapor drift upward. The smell is unexpectedly complex, herbal from the lavender, sharp from the lemon peel, and faintly bitter from the willow bark. It's a scent that doesn't try to seduce you like roasted sugar or cinnamon might. Instead, it feels purposeful, like the aromatic equivalent of someone adjusting your pillow and telling you to hush. You can almost picture a sleepless clerk in 1873 leaning over one of these devices, eyes half closed, letting the warm vapor curl into his lungs as the flicker of lamplight dances on his spectacles. Some believed the willow bark, containing salicin, a natural pain reliever, would ease headaches and body aches that kept them awake. The lavender was thought to steady the heart rate, while the lemon peel provided a faintly cheerful brightness to keep the blend from feeling too heavy. The man tells you of a friend's aunt who took the ritual to dramatic heights. She kept a set of 3 inhalers, each with a different blend for different grades of sleeplessness. If she was mildly restless, she'd use lavender and rose. If she was more troubled, she'd add valerian root. And if she was in full-blown insomnia mode, she'd bring out the willow bark mixture, muttering that it could quiet the rattling mind of the most worried widow in Wapping. You lean over the glass cylinder now, inhaling the thin vapor. It's not strong in the way of incense. It doesn't coat your throat or cling to your tongue. Instead, it's a passing ghost of fragrance, enough to be noticed, but light enough to vanish before you can name all its notes. There's a stillness that follows, like the hush after a candle is blown out. The gentleman, seeing your softened expression, smiles faintly. He insists it's not the herbs alone, but the act of focused breathing, slowing the inhale, stretching the exhale that lulls the body into surrender. He points out that many Victorian cures worked not because of their ingredients, but because they demanded stillness and ritual. The body, he says, recognizes the signal, even when the mind pretends not to. You stay like that for several minutes, your world reduced to the warm glow of the lamp, the glass tube's gentle heat, and the slow curl of vapor. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder whether you've stumbled upon the very first aromatherapy diffuser, Victorian edition. It's less sleek, perhaps, but no less deliberate in its design. When at last the lamp is extinguished, the room feels cooler, the vapor gone as though it had never been. You realize your shoulders have lowered, your jaw has unclenched, and the heavy curtain of sleep is already draping itself over your thoughts. The gentleman, ever polite, walks you to the door without asking whether it worked, because of course it did, in its own quiet way. As you step into the hallway beyond, the faint herbal trace still clings to your senses. It's not sweet, not dazzling, but it follows you like a whispered promise. Rest is near. Tonight, the room is small, almost claustrophobically so, its ceiling low and the corners shadowed as if they've been deliberately neglected. The fire in the grate burns low, barely enough to push back the creeping chill. And in the center of it all sits an object that looks suspiciously like a miniature coffin. Its sides are dark oak, the lid slightly raised on one end to reveal a delicate silver mesh inside. You approach it warily, and the woman tending it, round-faced with a knitted shawl draped over her shoulders, explains that this is a sleeping casket. The name is a little theatrical, but in truth it's meant for the living, not the dead. These curious Victorian contraptions were part furniture, part folk remedy, designed to enclose the head and upper torso in a warm, aromatic atmosphere believed to coax even the most stubborn insomniac into slumber. The idea, she says, dates back further than the Victorians, with roots in both Eastern steam therapies and medieval warming chests used in cold climates. Historians still argue whether the Victorians invented their own version independently or simply revived a centuries-old concept with a flourish of mahogany and brass. Either way, the contraption before you is both odd and strangely inviting. She gestures for you to kneel beside it, and you see that the silver mesh inside holds a scattering of dried chamomile flowers, crushed juniper berries, and something you can't quite identify. Peppery and resinous, perhaps frankincense. Beneath the mesh sits a small ceramic dish where hot water has been poured, letting the steam rise and carry the scents upward. The lid is designed so you can rest your chin on a padded edge while breathing in the fragrant warmth. It's a strange posture, but as you lean forward and close your eyes, the world narrows to the soft hiss of steam and the enveloping herbal fog. Chamomile, you recognize immediately, that apple-sweet note wrapping around your senses. Juniper follows, sharp but not unpleasant, like a brisk walk through pine woods. The mystery resin grounds it all with a faint suggestion of incense. The woman tells you about her grandmother who swore by this ritual every winter. She said the warmth tricked her bones into thinking it was summer, and the smell told her brain it was safe to let go. You can almost imagine the scene, a drafty Victorian house, frost etched on the windows, and a weary soul leaning over this little chest until her eyes grew heavy. Of course, some skeptics of the day dismissed sleeping caskets as little more than elaborate furniture for hypochondriacs. Doctors in period journals noted that the heat could sometimes worsen headaches or make breathing difficult for those with certain ailments. But enthusiasts countered that the slow, steady inhalation of soothing vapors worked wonders, if not for sleep, then at least for calming the nerves. The warmth begins to sink into your face and neck now, as if the air itself has weight. Your breathing unconsciously matches the rhythm of the rising steam. In, out, in, out. And here's the thing, you realize that this isn't just about herbs or heat. It's about creating a pocket of the world so small and predictable that nothing unfamiliar can creep in to wake you. Your thoughts drift to the kind of people who might have owned such a device. Wealthy insomniacs in gaslit townhouses, yes, but perhaps also anxious students, exhausted seamstresses, or aging sailors longing for the rocking cradle of a ship's cabin. Anyone who craved a private, contained corner of the world where the only task was to breathe. The woman watching you chuckles softly when you finally open your eyes. Told you it works, she says, as if you've just confirmed a family legend. And maybe you have. Because while the steam may have dissipated, the sense of enclosed safety lingers, an invisible casket you carry with you, one breath at a time. As you straighten up, the chill of the room creeps back, but it no longer feels unfriendly. You're warm from the inside out, your eyelids heavy, your thoughts quiet. And though the sleeping casket stays behind, you suspect its work will follow you long into the night. The room you step into next feels more like a Victorian conservatory than a bedroom. Glass walls fogged with condensation, the air heavy with plant scents so thick you could almost chew them. Ferns, palms, and potted citrus trees crowd every surface, their leaves trembling slightly in the warm draft from a hidden boiler. Somewhere in the midst of this miniature jungle sits tonight's oddity, a sleep tent of gauzy white fabric, suspended from a brass hoop and large enough to swallow an entire bed. It's not a mosquito net, although it looks like one at first glance. The woman tending it, tall with silver hair braided down her back, explains that this contraption was marketed in the 1880s as a therapeutic enclosure for the restless. According to the sales brochures she shows you, the tent was meant to create a microclimate of tranquility, holding in the warmth and scent of carefully selected plants placed at its perimeter. Inside, the air is thick with the sweet tang of orange blossom and the sharp, almost medicinal bite of eucalyptus. Victorian households with means often imported such plants specifically for this ritual, claiming their oils could soothe coughing fits and ease the racing mind. Historians still argue whether these aromatic tents actually improved sleep or simply offered the novelty of sleeping inside something that felt a little magical. She lifts one flap of the tent and gestures for you to crawl in. The fabric brushes against your shoulders, whispers soft, and once you're inside, the rest of the room disappears. All you see is a diffuse golden glow from a single lamp outside. All you hear is the soft rustle of leaves in the warm air. The plants around the bed release their fragrances slowly, as if aware of their role in this theater of drowsiness. It's surprisingly warm, not stifling, but enough to make your muscles loosen the way they do after a long bath. The orange blossom is the first scent that claims your attention. Sweet, almost honeyed, with a faint powdery softness. It wraps itself around your thoughts like a thick blanket. Beneath it, the eucalyptus cuts in with an icy clarity, keeping the sweetness from turning cloying. The combination is strange but balanced, like a lullaby with an unexpected harmony. You stretch out on the bed, noticing how the tent muffles sound from the rest of the room. A dropped pot, a creaking floorboard, even the hiss of the boiler feels far away now. The Victorians, you realize, might have stumbled on an important truth. That sleep isn't just about the mind shutting off. It's about creating an environment so buffered and enclosed that nothing external demands attention. The woman outside the tent begins telling you stories of her great-grandmother who had 3 identical tents, one for her bedroom, one for the summer house, and one she carried to friends' homes when staying the night. She said she couldn't sleep without her tent. The woman chuckles, like a snail without its shell. You imagine the sight of a wealthy Victorian lady arriving at a country estate, her luggage containing not just dresses and fans, but an entire bed-sized canopy. There were critics, of course. Some medical journals warned that overly enclosed sleeping arrangements could trap miasmas or stale air, potentially worsening the very conditions they aim to cure. Others countered that the plants themselves purified the air, a claim modern science would later find at least partially true. You lie there, tracing the way the fabric moves with each of your breaths, feeling the subtle play of scents in the warm air. There's something oddly childlike about it, like building a pillow fort and falling asleep inside, safe from the outside world. The tent makes the bed feel smaller, cozier, as if it's folding the space down to just the size you need for rest. When you finally crawl out, the cool air outside the tent feels sharper than expected, as if you've stepped from one climate into another. The plants seem almost to watch you, their leaves catching the light as if winking. And you think, maybe the Victorians didn't just build a sleeping aid. They built a portal, a way to slip from one world into another without leaving the room. The air now feels softer, as if the night itself has been leaning in to listen to our long wander through Victorian bedrooms. From the faint hiss of gas lamps to the weight of brass bed frames, from jars of lavender oil to entire indoor jungles, you've drifted alongside so many peculiar cures that the line between the real and the whimsical has blurred into something dreamlike. Each room, each curious object, each whispered superstition has been a stepping stone, carrying you further from the noisy world outside and deeper into the quiet corridors of another century. You can almost still hear the creak of those long-forgotten staircases, smell the faint perfume of pressed herbs folded into lace handkerchiefs. The Victorians, with all their contradictions, half science, half folklore, were chasing the same thing you are now, a way to slow the mind enough to let sleep find you. Historians still debate whether these rituals were medicine, theater, or just habit, dressed in silk. But here, in the hush after so many stories, the labels no longer matter. Let your breathing match the slow rhythm of the imaginary ticking clocks we passed. Feel the weight of warm covers, the gentle sway of curtain fabric in a late-night draft, the distant memory of those leafy tents and candlelit corridors. The journey doesn't need a final door to close. It simply folds in on itself, like the last page of a book pressed shut. The night is wide and patient, and somewhere in its depths, the Victorian strange little experiments in rest are still unfurling, scent by scent, whisper by whisper, waiting for you to step into them again. If not tonight, then in some other quiet hour. Sleep well,